Okay, I'll call the council workshop to order. Please note that in accordance with the town's procedure bylaw, no decisions are to be made, but rather this meeting is an opportunity for council to have an informal discussion regarding various matters. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, there being none then, I'll turn this over to Mr. McDougall for an introductory to the first item on our agenda, the recreation facility and field assets comparison. Mr. McDougall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually going to turn it over to Colin Service. He's going to give a brief introduction of the presentation this morning, and then we've got Monteith Brown here to walk us through what is a very important step in our process. Thank you.
Mr. Service.
Excuse me. Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. It is my pleasure today to introduce Todd Brown, who's the principal with Monteith Brown Planning Consultants. They have conducted a facility and an asset gap study, and he'll present his findings. I just wanted to set the context, though, and remind all the members of council that really through the Recreation Playbook process, we've been going through three central themes. One has been around price, and we talked about that previously. One has been around service delivery, and then the other is around the actual assets and facilities that we have. So this component represents that third phase. But for today, the purposes of today's presentation, nothing is being approved by council. Nothing would be approved until the whole document is presented in April. So this is an opportunity for Todd to present some of the work that he's done, and for you to ask any questions that you may have around the areas of facilities and some of our assets. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Todd.
Okay. Great, thank you. So it's my pleasure to talk to you about our findings with respect to recreation facilities in the town of Newmarket as part of your recreation playbook. So really this is a process, the recreation playbook is really a process to determine the go-forward services offered by the town to meet your needs. It will function as essentially as your master plan for recreation services, and it employs an extensive consultation program, although it's important to note that the work that we have done has not benefited from the consultation, so ours is more of a desktop exercise based on our experience and looking at the way your facilities are currently utilized. Once the consultation is done by your staff, that will be integrated and help to formulate the specific recommendations. So in terms of the recreation facility study, it's really prepared for informing the recreation playbook. It looks solely at recreation facilities, and it looks at over the next 10 years to the year 2025. What we've done is we've considered your local demographics, so it's important for us to understand who lives here now and who will live here in the next 5, 10, 15 or so years from now, and what age groups they represent and different socioeconomic characteristics that could have an impact. We're looking at trends and benchmarking, best practices, and generally accepted levels of service for the assessments. You'll see in ultimately our document will not identify the items as recommendations, but rather potential directions that would be confirmed through the consultation process itself. With regard to arenas, you have 7 municipal ice pads. We believe that that's sufficient to meet your current and long-term requirements. Subject to the playbook consultation and analysis, we think that one of the things that you should be looking at is considering divesting of the Hollingsworth Arena and relocating that pad to an alternative location, and we've identified a couple of possibilities for you. Really, it's a matter of the age of that structure, the amount of money that's going to be necessary to put into it to keep it going, and whether that makes sense as a standalone single-purpose facility. With regard to outdoor or indoor aquatics, you have a supply of 2 indoor aquatic facilities. Again, we believe, looking at the utilization and your population projections, that will be sufficient to meet both current and long-term requirements. Gymnasiums, you have some good agreements with the school boards. In addition, you have a couple of gyms yourself that you own. We do think there is an opportunity, however, to look at expanding the municipal gym provision to provide 1 additional gym at the Ray 20 Recreation Center or complex. That would really round out that facility and make it a multi-use, multi-generational, multi-seasonal type of facility. And also continuing to engage with reciprocal agreements to gain access to school facilities to ensure that they're available in the long term for your community organizations and for your own municipal purposes. Fitness is another area where municipalities and the private sector often sort of try to find their best, sort of where they best should be providing service so that they're not essentially competing with each other. We think that your current practice of focusing on floor-based fitness programs is a good one and should continue. However, there is opportunity to look at entry-level and family-based equipment-oriented activities pending the outcome of your service delivery review to determine whether or not that's a business you should be in. But really it's that entry-level and family-oriented area where we see an opportunity for that equipment-based entry. With regard to youth and older adults, and I must admit I noticed that we did have an error here, so there should have been a couple more words, but continuing to focus on youth-oriented programming through your Recreation Youth Center, and for older adult activities and programming at your Newmarket Senior Center. Those facilities both provide a really strong hub of activity for both of those age groups, and really it's a matter of looking at your other assets and identifying opportunities within them to meet both the older adult and senior group and the youth opportunities beyond those centers. So broadening the reach of programming out to your facilities like Magnus Center and Ray Twinney to additionally meet the needs of those growing populations. Sports fields is another big area. So we looked at your supply of rectangular fields and ball diamonds. We believe that there is sufficient numbers to meet your needs both now and into the long-term future. Engaging those user groups in terms of field quality will be an important aspect of the consultation process that your staff is undertaking. So you have enough, it's whether the quality is sufficient to meet their needs. And while you're looking at that, considering artificial turf as an opportunity, one of the things that we do find in many communities is that your soccer fields in particular will get high demand for football at the end of the season, for field lacrosse and rugby at the beginning of the season. They rough up the fields and then they don't make the fields in a very good condition for summer play type use. So the ability to look at outdoor artificial turf should be evaluated with the user groups. In terms of hard surface outdoor courts, we're recommending that you look at 2 additional tennis courts in order to provide sufficient numbers in good distribution within the municipality. Providing 2 pickleball courts. Pickleball is one of the fastest growing sports in Canada, and it's particularly popular among older adults. And so locating it in proximity to where older adults or seniors are located would make sense. And providing 3 additional basketball courts really to maintain a geographic balance so that there's good access within reasonable walking distance or biking distance for your youth population. With respect to outdoor aquatics, you already have essentially 2 spray pad facilities, and we're recommending that you have a total of 1 spray pad within each quadrant of your municipality, so you'd have a total of 4 to meet your needs. And continuing to operate the Gorman Pool over the next 10 years, there's no reason to believe that we're aware of that facility will not last for another 10 years. It appears to be in good condition and well maintained by your staff, and so it does serve a purpose in meeting some needs over that couple-month time frame in the summer. With regard to playgrounds, developing a minimum of 1 fully accessible, inclusive, barrier-free playground suitable for persons with disabilities, and through your replacement program and renewal programs associated with looking at those all of your playground facilities, and as part of your annual budgeting, looking at integrating within the existing supply barrier-free components so that persons with disabilities do have access to facilities or playgrounds within their general community area. In terms of next steps, it's really, I've tried to talk fast to make sure I get the information out within the time frame that we've been allotted, but really the goal now is to receive your input, and with our report, combining that with the municipal staff's consultation program, that will result in recommendations that are very specific to what one should do with both indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, and that would be contained within your recreation playbook document. And I'll be pleased to answer any questions you have or take down any comments.
Okay, I have Councillor Twinney in the queue. Councillor Twinney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to the beginning, you were talking about maintaining the number of pads that we should for our municipality. And you said to maintain a supply of 7. And you talked about getting out of Hollingsworth Arena. Can you sort of elaborate more on why, in particular, that you feel that we should be getting, like, de-investing in Hollingsworth Arena and then investing in another pad somewhere else?
Right. Well, our concern is that Hollingsworth is getting to an age where substantial capital dollars are going to be required in order to keep that facility going. And then if you want to bring it up to a more modern standard, even more money. And you get to a point where it doesn't make any sense to continue to put money into a facility, but rather looking at opportunities to relocate those to another location where it might be able to be twinned or tripled. So when we look at the possibility of adding it to, say, Ray Twinney Arena, you can consolidate a number of ice pads all in one location. From an operational point of view, your staff are all at one place to look after several ice pads, so your operating costs should go down. It's very good for organizations and for tournaments and things of that nature as well to be at one location for a number of pads. So that combined with Magna Center really does provide a great opportunity for the municipality. But it's really the age of the structure and a concern that it's getting to a point where so many dollars are going to be needed to be put into it that it doesn't rationalize as a long-term strategy of sustainability.
So
we could also look at partnering with the college, for example, as well in terms of, through the consultation, whether they're open to twinning their ice pad and working your 7th ice pad essentially there.
So, but obviously, I guess you don't get into the costs of like what it would cost to, obviously build a new ice pad as opposed to, updating the one that we have there. I guess you don't get into the actual comparables of how much it would cost us to do that. And through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be something, a different, that would be a project for us to do, I guess, through the town.
Yeah, like not at this time. We don't have a specific dollar amount that we have that would need to be going into the Hollingsworth facility.
Right.
And with combining a facility to an existing location, there are some capital cost wise, you're probably not going to save a lot of money. Operating wise, you would save some through that efficiency. Arenas are probably anywhere from 8 to 10 million for a new facility.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That can vary substantially depending on the type of structure and different components and level of finish and so forth. So that's just a very broad number.
Maybe some additional comments from our commissioner,
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think that for the sake of the playbook exercise, what the key statistic on this is around the fact that the maintenance of 7 ice pads, so our current inventory of ice pads, because there could have been, through this exercise, a realization that looking forward from today's needs even into the future that we need fewer than 7, or could be that we would actually need more than 7, so we'd need an additional net new ice pad. So the key number here is that our current inventory is forecasted to meet our needs. They're meeting our needs today, but as well forecasting as the population ages, as we become more ethnically diverse, we anticipate that we will still be okay with the current inventory. So that's the key statistic. How we actually operationalize that going forward, all of that will come through a council discussion and exercise in due time. The key number is maintaining the 7 ice pads.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Regional Councillor?
Thanks. On slide 6, I guess it is, or page 6, equipment-based fitness. Does that mean like workout equipment, like treadmills and Stairmasters and all those things?
Yes, it would be, although what we've talked about is really entry-level and family-oriented, so it's not to the same extent where you would be competing directly with many of the private sector fitness-type equipment-based operations. Often they serve more of the adult population and ones that are willing to pay a little bit more. So it's really just the entry level and a much more family oriented. So your family can go and participate in getting fit together.
And so you're talking like pieces of equipment, a handful of pieces of equipment, as opposed to like creating a center, or like that would just be an adjunct to other things you already offer, like at the Magna Center? Or?
It's really, part of this will come through your consultation process to determine just the scale of the need and whether it makes sense to be part of an existing facility or an add-on to a facility. Okay. So in terms of the facility assessment, we're not recommending a specific size, but really confirming that through the exercise with
Sure.
the consultation.
Okay, thanks. The next slide, you referred to the youth center and the senior center. I'm curious, the only place you seem to weigh in on the condition of the facility and the implications for that facility was the Hollingsworth Arena. Did the youth center or the senior center catch your attention at all in terms of the quality of the facility and investment going forward and its potential for relocation or partnerships? Or, I mean,
there wasn't anything as obvious as the arena was to us. I guess the arena we're quite familiar with going through many facilities like that. So you see the roof and so forth quite quickly, and the level of quality of the facility. For those two facilities, our sense was that they're both providing a specific need. If there's an opportunity for the private sector to get involved or a public-private partnership, that might be something that could be evaluated through the process. Really what we've identified is that having a facility oriented to the youth as a hub and oriented to the older adult seniors as a hub makes sense for your community and serves a significant role. I will say that many communities are looking at Newmarket and do talk about your youth center in particular. The fact that you have so many opportunities under one roof, and especially with indoor skateboarding being one of those elements, it is a highly sort of desirable facility that you have that many do not have.
Okay. Thank you. The last question I have on this is just about the splash pads or spray pads in each quadrant, and I think you referred to 4, so assuming the town's in the 4 quadrants. I guess question I'm wondering is, to what degree do we look at neighboring municipalities and what they already offer? And I guess I can't help but think in one case we have a splash pad that is like just over the border, and for all intents and purposes for most residents I'm not even sure they're aware it's over the border. So do we start to think about that kind of thing? Is there really a need for one over in that quadrant when there's something already there, and regardless of who's providing it?
Right. Certainly for any facility that you're looking at, you want to look at what neighboring communities have and their proximity to your boundaries in particular. For spray pads and playground equipment, they tend to be more walk to, bike to, and you want to encourage less of a drive to type facility. So in a neighboring municipality, certainly you wouldn't want to put a second spray pad right up against your boundary so those two are in close proximity. But we do think in that the quadrants, there is opportunity to have sufficient distribution away from neighboring municipalities' spray pads that it would continue to make sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. McDougall, further comments, please?
Just, if I may, Mr. Mayor, just to add a little comment on the question around Hollingsworth Arena. One of the things that Monteith Brown benefited from was a study that was done, I think it was a couple of years ago now, and it was in response to a need to go back and on an ongoing basis and look at the programming ice needs in the community following the opening of the Magna Center. So we had a small study done which looked specifically at ice surfaces and ice utilization. And so within the scope of Monteith Brown's work is to do a peer review of that study as well as seeing if things have further changed in the usage patterns. So there's a little bit more of a specific reference around ice. In terms of this seniors youth and the opportunities there, one of the things that is being discussed that may come out of either the playbook or through another exercise is to look town-wide in terms of accommodation studies, and is there any opportunity going forward in the future to consolidate facilities and those sorts of things. So a larger accommodation study that may be something that would be looked at. And that would look specifically more at the current condition of facilities, such as, for instance, the Senior Center, Youth Center, and other facilities in town as well. So that could come out as a result going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Bassans?
I am on. Thank you very much. And thanks for your presentation. I have a few questions. The first relates to the ice pads. And you know that, or you may know that this year has been kind of an exciting time because we've had a couple of three pilot sites where volunteers are expected to set it up and everything else. Was there any consideration for a permanent outdoor rink in what you were looking at?
Well, what we've talked about is, in the report itself, is one, supporting the sort of community-based third-party running of natural ice, so municipality providing the land or opportunity for a community organization to come forward to maintain natural ice. But looking at, if there is a need for artificial outdoor ice, looking at it more from a civic perspective. So if there is a desire to add it in as part of your municipal offices as a feature, or within a feature park, or something that would be more of a destination, looking at something of that nature, but not specifically identifying it as something you need to do, but certainly support for the natural ice approach of getting the community groups organized and wanting to provide that level of service. Certainly the last 2 years have been exciting because it has been much colder, and so the ability to create ice naturally has been there. In previous years, we started to have warmer winters, and so maintaining that ice on a consistent basis was very difficult for municipalities and groups themselves to do, and so you'd end up offering it for short spurts of time over the winter. But given our cold seasons, it provides great opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And a question with respect to the aquatics, that the two indoor centers are sufficient, and yet I hear concern from a lot of residents that, despite trying to be the first in line to register their kids, that they get bumped out, and that there's a real challenge. And with the population growing, I just wonder how you determine that 2 is sufficient, if it seems as though we already have a wait list for the community for swim classes.
Well, your wait list isn't sufficient to justify a third facility. What we're looking at is you used to accommodate about 28,000 swim programs, participants, and so forth per year. You're at about 21,000 right now, so there is capacity to accommodate some additional programming. Staff have really looked at your trying to be as efficient as possible with the use of your current facilities, so you're getting the most bang for your buck in terms of use of each of the aquatic centers. It's not uncommon for communities to have a bit of a waiting list for swimming lessons. Again, it's not sufficient enough to justify a third facility. And in addition to that, I guess the population growth, when you look at it, what is growing, largely it's your older age population that is growing more so than any of the other age groups. So you're going to have much more demand, say, for lane swim or for therapeutic warm water swimming, as opposed to swimming lessons into the future. So we think that there's plenty of opportunity to accommodate that demand as you move forward.
Okay. And one more question, if I may. You talk about the outreach opportunities at the facilities. Is that like loaning out to other groups, or what do you mean by outreach?
Well, I think that might have been with respect to older adults and youth. Was it?
No, it was with respect to use of the facilities.
Okay. It was really looking at the ability that your existing facilities have many opportunities within them. And so when we're looking at the ability to maximize their use, so you have a number of program rooms that are available at various times throughout the day. You know, is there an ability to get more people into those rooms so that they have a higher utilization level to serve your community? So if a group's out there or individuals are out there looking for space, making sure that they're aware that there is space available for them. It's also tied to the youth and the older adults to say that, yes, you have facilities that are specific to each of those age groups, but there are interests beyond that your other facilities can accommodate. You know, youth and older adults are looking for swimming, they're looking for skating, they're looking for many opportunities, gym-based opportunities that the Magna Center offers.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Broom-Plumley.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question regarding barrier-free playgrounds for persons with disabilities. Can either yourself or our commissioner provide me with maybe an example from a neighboring municipality where a park like that may exist?
I should be able to pull one right off the top of my head, but I can't.
What we're referring to, and I don't know that I can provide you an exact example right off the top of my head, but what we're defining is most of our playgrounds are already meeting AODA standards. It's more about creating the opportunity for those with disabilities to actually engage. So equipment that enables someone with a wheelchair to get up into the equipment, those kinds of things, as opposed to just surface that allows you to maneuver around a surface. So if you remember, the AOK Park used to have a large structure on it that you could go up on a ramp. Now that had other issues, so it had to be removed, but things more along those lines is what is referred to.
Okay, thank you.
And I can certainly provide examples, but which I can provide after the fact. But you know, the key is that often communities will put in, let's say, a swing as part of, and that provides access to a person with disabilities. And it's one opportunity, but it's really trying to provide an entire playground where a person with a disability can interact on the entire facility and may be able to interact with others with disabilities as well. It certainly would be available to any resident in the community, but it's really to provide that greater level of access and ensuring that, you know, not only is the facility accessible, but the pavement to get there that there's is accessible, that there's no curbs that are in the way, so you make sure the curb cuts are there to allow access, and that the ground that is around it is not sort of a sand-based ground, so that you can't get a wheelchair through or something of that nature.
Okay, thank you. So potentially the town could be the first to have such a facility if there's no other example that may exist?
I think there's many examples of them. I unfortunately just can't think of one off the top of my head.
Okay.
But I will get some examples that I can provide through your staff to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Twinney.
Going back, sorry, through Mr. Mayor, the hard surfaces outdoor courts, you talked about providing perhaps another 2 tennis courts, pickleball courts, and basketball courts. Is there any specifics on location of these as well? Because I know we talked about locations sort of with the spray pads, but does the study drill down into where these should be located, like looking at what we have now and where we should have future sites?
Yes. Well, the studies identified that there are certain gap areas for different types of facilities. So it was identified in general terms, areas where one might look. With respect to, say, pickleball, it's not specific to a location, but rather identifying that it makes sense to put it somewhere where older adults and seniors already are. So
Okay.
whether it's near your older
Senior
adult
center.
senior center,
Right.
or whether it's near apartment buildings or things of that nature that have a lot of older adults and seniors in it.
And that's, in the study, it sort of talks to those points? Is
Yes.
it? Okay. And so will we be able to get a copy of the study as well? Okay, thank you.
What it is that because the consultation is occurring separate, the recommendations in this report are a little bit more generic in terms of locations, because we really want to make sure that when the groups are talked to and the public is talked to, that if they identify a specific area, that can be integrated in and you have the flexibility.
Sorry, just to follow up with that, so are we going back to the public with this again to talk about and to get into it, is that right? Or what's the next
Service?
step? I guess we'll talk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. To answer a couple of questions there. Firstly, yes, the study is going to be included with all the final publications, so that you'll have all of that background. And within that study, everything's actually mapped, so you can see exactly where the courts are, and it's very easy to define where the gap areas are. And then we would be making recommendations based on where we identify those gap areas and where the public has indicated that there is that need. In terms of process, once we've developed a draft plan, then we will bring that to council for some feedback on that draft plan and go out one more time in a round of public engagement to make sure that it is continuing to meet the needs of the community. And the way we intend on doing that is twofold. One, anyone that we engaged in a specific PIC, like our sport user groups, we've committed that we would come back to them again as well. And so that's that question.
Thank you. I have a question with respect to utilization and capacity. And do we keep specific records to try to determine what facilities are utilized, what are available, and what are at capacity, what are over capacity? Do we have those kind of records that would help us guide that? Will that be part of the report?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. We have a lot of stats available. One is registered programs. We would be able to tell you exactly how many people have registered. And to Councillor Pazan's earlier point about swim lessons as an example, where we hear anecdotally that a lot of people are saying, I can't get into the program, I'm on a wait list. The reality is that we actually have more spaces available still than we have people on wait lists. So the issue is that people are on a wait list for a specific time, but they may still be able to get in at a different time. So it's not, and that speaks to Todd's earlier point, that the capacity is there, it's just that it's not necessarily at the time. So we have that kind of level of detail with all of our drop-in programs. We can tell you exactly how many participants, and that will all be included, so we know where we're overflowing with drop-ins and where we have drop-ins that aren't doing quite as well. What we don't really have a great mechanism to give you is just general use. If people come into a facility and aren't actually participating in something actively, but they're just sort of there in the facility, that's the one piece that we're not really as comfortable being able to provide, but we're working on that. So.
But say, for example, the upstairs meeting room at the Magna Center, if that's underutilized, you'd know that, or what the time frames are?
Yes, we'd be able to tell you exactly when it's booked through community bookings, because it's a rental facility, as well as how often we've used it for programs and what the participation is in all of those programs. And then we pay close attention to that, even determining our facility hours and what kinds of programs we're offering now. We try to maximize those things even as it exists right now.
Okay.
So.
Any records in terms of the extent to which non-resident utilization is influencing our capacity? Do we know that?
Yes, we know exactly through all of our program registrations. First of all program registrations are only open to residents 1 week prior, and then after they've had a week to register, then it opens to non-residents. But yes, we can tell you exactly how many are residents versus non-residents.
Okay, and then finally, does this report, or will the recreation playbook also reflect the fact that the Old Town Hall is going to be coming on stream later this year, and how that affects our capacity to deliver services?
It will be discussed in the context of the recreation playbook. It's not specifically considered within the study that was prepared by Monteith Brown, but it will be explored.
Good. So this is actually just a generic look at the facilities that we have, what's being delivered there, and the recreation playbook then will more reflect the community needs and how we modify what we offer in those facilities.
Right. What we specifically wanted to do was have a very independent look at our facilities in the context of what other municipalities provide and what typically a municipality can expect, and have that done completely separate from the public engagement, so that was a neutral look, and then we weren't overly swayed by one or two really passionate individuals, but that we have that sort of that neutral look, and then we'll overlay all of the public feedback into that neutral look.
Good. Thank you. Councillor Bay?
I should mention that as much as this is a desktop exercise, it is very specific to your community at the same time. So yes, we've looked broadly at what other communities are doing, but we look very closely at your demographics. So that's very closely tied to what is appropriate for you as a municipality. But certainly benchmarking against what other communities are doing, what trends they're seeing that might influence the level of demand for different types of facilities. Looking specifically at your utilization data. So how well utilized the facilities are, is there capacity accommodating that could accommodate additional use, or are you at capacity? So things of that nature is certainly part of the study, but it's the next sort of augmenting that or bringing the consultation in that really fills out that playbook and gives you a strong sense as council of all these pieces coming together and what the future direction that makes sense.
So external benchmarking effectively. Yeah. Good. Good. Councillor Bay?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation. Our recreational and leisure facilities have a huge impact on the quality of life of our residents, and it's something that our residents appreciate, and we're always asking for more of it. Just a quick question, and actually a couple of questions, and Colin, you may have the answer for this off the top of your head. Tennis courts and basketball courts are relatively low cost. They don't have walls, they don't have roofs, we don't heat them, some may be lit. Do you have off the top of your head what it costs to, since we do have the land already, what it costs to build, for example, a basketball court?
Go ahead. Mr. Service?
That's a very difficult question because basketball isn't always just a basketball court. There are those other factors like how flat the land is already, what kind of grading is required, the size, because the dimensions can change dramatically, and the level of surface, the quality of surface that you want can influence that dramatically. So I can't really give you any kind of definitive that would be fair.
A ballpark, perhaps?
It would be less than a ballpark.
I'll give you that. Okay. A racetrack then? Okay, and imagine the answer is the same for tennis courts then. But I think we can assume, relatively speaking, to other recreational facilities, because those things would have to be addressed too. Relatively speaking, they're very low cost. And as part of that question, maintenance costs for basketball and tennis courts, they're very low cost also. Just comment on that.
They're lower cost than some other things, yes. And again, it really depends on what the quality and standard that you want for that tennis court or that basketball court, what your intention is. If you wanted to host major tournaments or even big tournaments at a tennis court, then it would need more attention than if it's never going to be used for that purpose. So without defining exactly what the purpose is and the expectations, it's difficult to say.
And a final comment on that. In discussions with the volunteers that are doing the rink in Ward 1, it's come up a few times, not necessarily in that location, but in any location. If you had a basketball court, for example, where the ground was already level and it's a significant size, all of a sudden you're looking at a multi-use that in the off-season, if you will, it can be used as a rink. And so the ground is level, it's a good size, et cetera. So a bit of multi-use on the same surface as we go through the seasons.
Mr. Service?
Sorry, I don't know why I keep turning it off. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, our belief absolutely is that a paved outdoor surface makes more sense to put an arena over than a field because of the implications in the spring, for sure.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hempin.
Thank you.
When we do the analyzation of peak times and when the spaces are being used and when there's an opportunity where areas of our recreation areas are not being used and on a consistent basis, are we going to be looking at maybe offering these facilities or offering programs to people in the community who maybe can't afford it for free and using those times when the facility, quite frankly, isn't being used or areas aren't being used?
Mr. Service?
Yes, we are going to be exploring and again, this is just in terms of the process, we have three real themes that we're exploring through the Recreation Playbook. One is around service delivery, and so to your point, if areas where we know we have capacity, but we're just not able to fill that capacity, that's part of how we program and how we provide service, and so we'll need to review that and ensure that what we're doing is meeting the marks of what the community needs and wants. The other area that we're focused on is pricing and developing a service pricing policy that builds on the existing service pricing policy, but also explores ways to subsidize and help those who can't afford to pay it all. So.
Thank you. Councillor Pazans?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask a question for clarification around the tennis courts and the pickleball courts, because I think you had said the pickleball courts would be in closer proximity to existing senior centers, but these are outdoor courts we're talking about, not...
Right, these are outdoor courts, and so pickleball you can play indoors in a gymnasium, which is quite popular, but you also see more and more communities looking at outdoor opportunities for their residents, so that the older adults and seniors that are the ones who play it the most have that outdoor opportunity as well. Our belief was that somewhere in proximity to where a large number of older adults and seniors tend to go, so whether it's where they live or whether it's closer to the senior center, would make good sense if the opportunity presents itself. That, you know, is there land in the proximity that makes sense? Then a location would be preferable in close proximity to that facility. But again, staff would have to take a look at whether or not there is good opportunity and that it doesn't negatively impact other offerings that may be at those locations nearby.
So could a pickleball court be the same as a tennis court? Like, could they be used?
You know, we get that question. We get that question quite a bit. Technically, they could be. The biggest challenge, though, is the net for a tennis court is quite low, and a pickleball court tends to be a little higher. It's a little bit closer to what you might see for badminton. So it's, you know, making those adjustments and then the lines on the court itself would be different. So is that confusing for people to have multiple lines on a surface? What I think it does do, though, is if you find that there's a decline in tennis over time, because we have seen tennis go up and down in terms of participation over the past 10, 15 years and more. So if there was a decline and you were finding your tennis courts weren't as well utilized as they could be, converting those to pickleball for a period of time could be a possibility to augment the supply, especially if the growth in that sport continues to see the growth that it has over the last number of years. So we're looking at both indoor and outdoor opportunities for them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions, so what we'll do then is we'll move on to order to 12. The next segment that we have is the legislation effect. What's the time frames with respect to that? Thank you very much. It was
Thank you.
Informative, and we're looking forward to the information feeding into the recreational master plan. Thank you. Okay. So it looks approximately half hour. I think this is an important consideration for us, considering what's next on the workshop. So if members of council are okay, instead of starting lunch at noon, maybe at 12:15 or so, I don't think would be too traumatic unless anyone has a concern there. We'll go ahead and we'll do this presentation, and then we'll take a break for lunch and then come back into the master plan, okay?
Well, being cognizant of the time, I won't delay. If we're good to go, I'll start. Sound okay? So thank you for taking the opportunity this morning to let me give you a bit of background on the legislation that affects fire protection service delivery in both Newmarket and Aurora. The purpose of this next short session is to give a bit of background to help you understand some of the context of the discussions that are going to take place after break with regards to the Master Fire Plan update, which will be provided by the consultant. sorry, there. So the legislation that primarily affects fire protection service delivery in Ontario is the Fire Protection and Prevention Act 1997. That act provides for a number of different things to be done for fire protection in Ontario. The reason why we are bringing it to your attention is it's the foundation of everything else that we have to deal with fire services. So the need for a master fire plan really stems from this legislation. What we can do in the provision of services stems from this legislation. How we structure those services is constrained by this legislation. The obligations for us to act and the repercussions for us not acting are all laid out in this legislation. That being said, there are other pieces of legislation which directly affect fire protection as well, fire services as well. But for the purposes of today's discussion, we weren't going to go into much detail at all into any of those, i.e. none, with the exception of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which I'll mention briefly and I'll come back to again a bit later on. So in the FPPA, there's basically a number of provisions there. The core one at the beginning of it is the provision of fire protection services by municipalities, and that's what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about. There are also provisions in there for powers for the fire marshal, for the fire marshal's office, how it should be structured, what its powers are, what it can do, and how it can act, which does have direct impact in our fire services here. It also has provisions for rights of entry, for dealing with immediate threats to life, for dealing for fire safety inspections and enforcement of the Ontario Fire Code. Again, that's something that the fire service deals with quite routinely, but we're not going to get too much into this morning. Further, there are provisions in the Act for labor relations. So specific to fire services, labor relations issues are laid out in the FPPA, not in other labor laws, to which emergency services are most typically exempt from most other labor laws. So with certain restrictions. But there are quite a bit of extensive information in the FPPA with regards to labor relations, which affects our relationship with the association, and also how we can structure our fire services is affected by that as well. There is a section in the Act which deals with definitions. The reason I bring it up is because there are some definitions which, as defined in the Act, may not be what you would normally think in the way of their use. So firefighter, for example, includes all members of the fire department, including the chiefs, the communication, the fire prevention people, the training officers, as well as the suppression firefighters are all technically firefighters under the Act. The other thing to bring to your attention is fire protection services is not just responding to fires, but is really it's a very broadly defined term which incorporates any emergency response basically affecting rescue or public safety. So, for example, Central York Fire Services provides responses to water and ice rescue emergencies. That falls within the broad definition of fire protection. We respond to motor vehicle collisions. We respond to entrapments and other rescue issues, all of which falls within the broader context of fire protection services. For, I think, the decision makers for our two municipalities that we serve, this is the heart of the legislation, wherein it says that municipality must provide public education and some fire safety activities, and also such other fire protection services as it determines may be necessary in accordance with its needs and circumstances. So I'll talk a little bit about what 21A means, which is basically what our fire prevention division in Central York Fire Services provides for us, with some assistance in the suppression division, but that's largely 21A is provided by fire prevention. 21B is the much broader range of services that the municipality may provide, and as you can see, it's not very particularly defined. It leads us to look at our needs and circumstances. How do we assess our needs and circumstances? Well, we need to look at our risks, our capabilities, including financial capabilities, and look at how then we're going to provide services appropriate to the communities that we serve that is in accordance with our needs, i.e. risks, and the circumstances that we've got to be able to provide that. Certainly in doing so, there's a couple of different things and different mechanisms a person can do in reflecting on what our needs and circumstances are. The consultant that we've contracted will bring you through those in some significant detail, but it includes things like looking at the statistical results of emergencies that we've experienced, what we can forecast for the future, as well as what are our comparators doing in the same line of service. Caveat with the comparators is irrespective of what the comparators are doing, we must meet our needs and circumstances, and so that's what we really, at the heart of it, have to pay attention to. I'll probably come back a bit to that, and I'm sure the consultant will come back to that a fair bit in the discussion with regards to the master fire plan update, is what are the needs and circumstances of the towns of Aurora and Newmarket. The Fire Marshal's Office a number of years ago further defined 2.1a to provide guidance to municipalities as what that sort of fuzzy language in the legislation really means when it talks about providing fire safety and public education. So they've basically defined it as being 4 separate bits. A simplified risk assessment, i.e. you look at your municipality and see which properties and residents are most at risk, why are they most at risk, what can we do to assess the risk with regards to those residents. The fire safety education material, again, that's a fairly broad comment, but it's just some sort of public education toward our residents and corporations that operate within our municipality to ensure that they can reduce the probability of fire and are prepared in case a fire does occur. Smoke alarm program, that's being extended also typically to include a carbon monoxide program. And I should point out too that this guideline from the Office of the Fire Marshal is subject to review currently, and it will be revised subsequent to 2015 once they get a chance to revise it. It'll probably incorporate carbon monoxide, and it will probably incorporate some further inspection requirements to deal with directives that the Fire Marshal has issued in the interim since this guideline first came out back in the early 2000s. So the last of those 4 bits being inspections upon complaint or when requested to assist with code compliance. The evolution of the last few years is a focus by the Fire Marshal's Office on institutional occupancies that are a particular concern where residents are at risk. Vulnerable occupancies was the term I was looking for. So there's been some guidance from the Fire Marshal's Office that there's an obligation on the municipality to routinely inspect and conduct fire drills in vulnerable occupancies, which is not currently reflected in this piece of information. But that's basically, when you're looking at what the fire prevention elements are that the Central York Fire Services is obligated to provide, this is basically it. Sir?
Well, just one question of clarification here.
Just around the fire marshal, can you explain who the fire marshal is? Is it an office of the provincial government? Where is the fire marshal? Sure. A little bit of background information about our fire marshal.
Okay, sure. The current fire marshal is a gentleman named Tadeusz Vinslavik. He's appointed by the provincial government. He's it's a branch of the Ministry of Correctional Services, and geez, they changed their name so many times I can't exactly remember what the current ministry is. Public Safety and, sorry, it is a provincial government branch. The organization's about 200 people. They have an office in Toronto. They are responsible to the government for the implementation of this act and to report to the government as to how the 470 some odd municipalities in the province are doing in complying with this legislation and the provision of fire protection services. So that's one big component of what they do, is they provide guidance, assistance for municipalities to provide services, and they also do some element of monitoring, checking to see how things are going, how well municipalities are doing. They're largely complaint or disaster driven, so if there's been a particular problem in a particular municipality, they will come in and review that, and they will assess whether the fire services in that municipality are problematic or not, if they meet the needs and circumstances of the municipality, and if not, what should be done about that. They also, the element that they catch the news most for is they are responsible for doing difficult fire investigations in the province, including all fatal fires. They're obligated to do investigations of. So they work with our fire service people and the local police in order to do those sort of investigations. They also run the Ontario Fire College, which provides some fundamental training to fire services. There's 34,000 firefighters in the province, 11,000 of whom are full-time firefighters. The remainder are volunteers. So the Fire Marshal's Office has this fire college, which provides some fundamental training, usually focused towards officer development, to ensure that they're adequately trained to do their services. They also develop and implement the fire code I used to work for them, that's why I have a very good
That's
knowledge
not
about
question
it. I could go on for another really long time, but I won't. Does that answer the question, sir?
Perfectly.
Thank you. So as I just recap, so where we're at was saying, here's the legislation, here's what it requires. It requires a municipality to provide services, specifically fire prevention services, and this is what the fire prevention services look like. I mentioned that the other services are in accordance with the needs and circumstances of the municipality. So how can a municipality provide those services? Well, the legislation allows for Central York Fire Services to exist by saying that you can have 2 or more municipalities combining and having one fire department. So that's where the legislation allows for our existence. Legislation also provides for being a good neighbor and helping out outside of your community, your municipal boundaries, depending on the circumstances of the area in which you find yourself. In some parts of the province, you may find that you're a fairly capable, well-resourced fire service surrounded by areas that are very challenged to having any resources, in which case you can sell your services or you can assist your neighbors as you see fit. And this part of the legislation provides for that that facility. It also provides for the ability to participate in mutual aid plans. In Ontario, every fire service in the province is involved with a mutual aid plan, which extends not only amongst the various municipalities, but actually interprovincially and internationally to allow us to share resources in the event of major emergencies. We routinely use these for asking for assistance when we have working fires, typically in our municipality, either for coverage or assistance on the ground at those fires. When I say routinely, probably 20 to 30 times a year we request assistance from others, and about 15 to 20 times a year we have requests for us to go and assist our neighbors. In addition to that being mutual aid, there are fire protection agreements, and it's important to point out that we're providing fire protection under agreement to 2 adjoining municipalities, the Township of Winchester-Stouffville and the Township of King. So we provide fire protection by agreement to portions of both of those municipalities under this authority. There's also automatic aid agreements. Frankly, that's where the closest station to a fire or an emergency will respond at the same time as the host or the home department responds to this. I wanted to point out that this stems from a long history, many of which were tragic, of very bad situations which have accrued over the last 100 years in Ontario, resulting in a number of inquests. And the recommendation of those inquests was that it is unconscionable that people are subjected to an emergency where they have a traumatic loss up to and including multiple deaths. A large part of the contributor to that result was because the closest fire department did not respond to their emergency because it was outside of their municipal boundaries. There's been some particularly notorious ones stemming where literally you could see the fire burning and the people died in that fire. You could watch it from the fire station across the street, but they were not able to respond because it was outside of their municipal boundary. So this legislation provides for that, I don't think of a word I can say in public, but that unfortunate circumstance not to arise again, to encourage municipalities to have automatic aid where they can facilitate this help to their neighbors when they're having this sort of an emergency. So that's spelt out. Now, it's worth noting that the fire protection agreement that we have with the Township of Winchester-Stouffville is an automatic aid agreement for much of the service area. We respond, they respond at the same time. We do charge a fee for that, and there's nothing in the legislation that precludes that. That's a bit different from the service we provide in King on the other side of the municipality, where we respond solely to emergencies unless we need their assistance to it. So it's a fine difference, but that's where that comes from. The question was posed, what is the fire marshal about and how does that operate? And within this legislation, I just wanted to point out that what happens if a municipality does not do what the legislation lays out for them to do. The fire marshal's office will send advisors in to review the service delivery, and if they find it to be wanting, they will make recommendations to the municipality to act. If the municipality fails to act, they will strongly recommend that they do something. If they continue to fail to act and the situation warrants it, they will go to the Lieutenant Governor and seek a regulation to come in and issue an order wherein they will basically force the municipality to provide fire protection that they feel is appropriate. In the 18 years that the legislation's been in place to allow for that, that's never happened. There have been dozens of municipalities that have been reviewed for their fire protection services. Many of those have been found to be very wanting. The Fire Marshal's Office has been able to work with those municipalities, in some cases fairly strong-armed, working with those municipalities to get them to improve their fire protection to a point where the Fire Marshal decided at the end of the day that a regulation was not warranted and didn't need to basically go around council to affect change. But that power is there. So just as far as what happens if you were to say, we're not going to have a fire service, or we're going to only provide a very limited fire service or fire protection, what would happen? Right under the regulation, that is, or pardon me, under the legislation, that is a possibility that the Fire Marshal's Office could step in. Realistically, for Newmarket and Aurora, the only situation I would expect that we would see that type of involvement from the Fire Marshal's Office would be if we had a series of very poor responses to emergencies, or there was a couple of catastrophic emergencies where our response capability or our fire prevention services were called into question. I could see that they could then perhaps come in and have a review. But it's just more as giving background than as a realistic possibility anytime soon. Leads me to the fire chief's responsibilities. So under the legislation, it identifies that there is a fire chief that is responsible to council, or in this case to both councils, to Aurora and Newmarket, that the fire chief is ultimately responsible to those two councils for the fire protection for the 140,000 residents that we protect. In doing so, there's a lot of things that individual is obligated to follow, as well as following this legislation. There's all the other legislation that applies, such as the Highway Traffic Act and Criminal Code and Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection and Privacy Act, and there's about 30 other legislation that applies. But one that routinely kicks in on our operational decisions and also kicks in on our strategic planning decisions is the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So just want to remind you or turn your mind to the fact that when we're looking at our needs and circumstances for our municipality, it's not only our ability to provide services to the municipality that's got to be considered, but it's also the responsibility to provide services to our own staff. So what I mean by that is that if we are deciding to provide response to hazardous material responses to meet our needs and circumstances, we are obligated to train and equip our people with providing that response with the equipment that they need and the training that they need. And that's why I think you'll see this afternoon, we're going through the Master Fire Plan update, that there's an underlining or some close attention paid to the training division as well, to ensure that we've got the resources to ensure our people are properly trained. Because it's not just about the frontline service delivery, it's also the other elements that are needed in order to ensure that that's done thoroughly and well. And timing-wise, that was what I had planned to tell you, so I'm open to questions.
Councillor Broom-Plumley.
Thank you for your presentation. I just have a quick question with regards to Bill 77. Have we as a municipality taken any steps to engage the community or to enforce the bill in terms of providing information? I know your website has the information on it, but I don't believe the town's has any at the moment.
With regards to carbon monoxide?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I could be a little bit rusty, I haven't looked at it immediately, but both towns' websites link to the department's website, and then the department's website has material on it. The prevention division is charged with dealing with the assessment of the properties that are in compliance with that. So it is part of their risk assessment that they do on an annual basis. But they look at the 47,000 some odd properties in the two municipalities and say which ones of these are most at risk and what will we do to target that. And then they target it by three methods. One is by public education campaigns to advise through media and other methods, getting the message out about that. And I've got to say, I think the department does an excellent job of doing that in media releases and in very effective public education campaigning. One of our recent recruits to the prevention division has a good skill set for using social media, and there's been a lot more recent activity in that area to help promote that. So the public education component to that, we make much better use the last several years of our in-service fire crews to help get out on the street, both to promote the message just by their presence and also to hand out material supporting smoke alarm usage, home escape planning, and carbon monoxide detectors. So that's the second step of it. The third step is we respond to any complaints as we need to through inspection, and also any time that our fire crews in responding to an incident determine that there's a carbon monoxide lack, then they will ensure that the Fire Prevention Division follows up and enforces the legislation.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Hempin?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, too, and answering the question about the fire marshal. I love information and detail and information, and I'm wondering if the fire marshal, do they record response times, different response times for different municipalities, and is that gathered somewhere? And I'm just wondering where Newmarket falls under response times. Are we exceptional? Are we in the middle? Or and if that information could be provided to us. Maybe if you can give me a little answer, maybe I'll follow up with another question after that.
Sure. The simple answer is no, they don't collect that information in a way that they can make available to us. Personal observation, the Fire Marshal's office has really been hampered the last several years through constraints on their budget, and it's affecting their staffing and also their service delivery. In fact, recently I was trying to collect some data for Joint Council Committee that used to be readily available from the Fire Marshal's office in a 5-minute conversation. I should have had that emailed to my desk, and it was not available to me. On the very issues you're asking about, things like staffing and response times and that type of thing. So no, it's not readily available from them. The other real challenge in making available information that is helpful and background and comparative is you really need to review the information that you're provided to see that it is accurate. As an example, on response times, there are departments that will tell you they have a 3-minute response time, which is physically impossible. But as they define response time, it is only the rolling vehicle time, and they can't actually make a 3-minute response time. But my point with that is that you do need to be cautious when you're even making a survey of people to say, what is your service level? Because if you just take it at face value, what they provide you without investigating it further, it will be misleading. As an example, I've recently asked, I think, 8 other municipal fire services what their response times are, including as we understand response times and as we measure response time, which is the time from the 911 call through the police handling of the call, the fire service handling of the call, the toning out of the fire department to respond to the call, the assembly of the firefighters on the truck to respond to the call, responding to the call, and then getting off the truck at the incident. That's what we call response time. Having established that, said to 9 fire departments, please tell me what your response times are, I had some come back with physically impossible times, such as 4 minutes. So in order to research that further, I have to follow up with that and get into more detail. And I am a little bit subject, unless you pull the actual response criteria, how accurate that is.
I see. Yeah, for us, I guess it's important that we know where we kind of fit in the province, I guess, and maybe even in the country. And you know, we use this wonderful agency. It's called BMA, and they have all kinds of data and what costs are. And I think as a municipality, we can dig down deeper and get further information on what things cost. And part of our master plan talks about cost to our municipality in Aurora and where we both stand on costs for different things. But I guess for myself, I'd like to see something, and I don't know if it comes through the fire service or through a BMA study, giving us that information on whether it would be the initial response time or what's the other one? The depth of response, I guess, and the turnout times, just so we have more information, because we don't have a lot. We don't know where we fall in a comparator against other municipalities, and I guess those are my comments. And I have lots of questions for when we have our fire master plan later on. Hopefully you'll be here, and Chief will be here, obviously, and we'll get some answers to my questions anyway. Thank you.
If I can follow up to that, I can tell you that, and we have, as a result of one of the Joint Council Committee meetings, started to collect certain information on what we see as our comparative fire services on some of those questions. And I think in providing that information, that will probably prompt you and others to have further questions, which we can then refine and do some further investigation on. So I don't mean to give the impression that any data we can get is not helpful. It's just a bit of a caveat to be cautious on the first blush of any data that you get. So let's just dig in and look at it. But we can certainly do further investigation.
Sure, yeah. And well, if we could get something more, I'll be suggesting in the future that we use the BMA and ask them to gather some of that, do some data mining for us and give us that information. And I guess when we have anomalies and we see anomalies, then maybe we can dig down, or maybe we'll just discount them and not put them as part of the overall analysis. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good point in terms of being able to benchmark our performance, our efficiencies, our effectiveness externally. We do that with a number of things, and it's just a matter of getting the right kind of information to make sure that it's accurate and it enables us to make the right decisions. I think that's
Sure.
the whole purpose of the exercise.
Definitely.
Okay. Any other questions? We see a lot of municipalities, Paul, that are growing very rapidly, one to the north and one to the south of us in both situations. And at what point in time, for example, does the council come to the decision in terms of the expansion? Just one example is to the north of us, we're going to be seeing a huge population increase, and that's in a large measure serviced by a volunteer fire department. Now, do they have to go, or are they required to go through a fire prevention plan, as we are, a master plan, just to provide for that growth, or how does that work?
Right. So it's a very broad question, really, to answer thoroughly, but just take a couple of minutes, I'll try. Simple answer is that they're affected by the same legislation as we are. So they are obligated to look at their needs and circumstances and provide services that meet those needs and circumstances. Which is a small correction, they have a composite fire department now. So they have full-time firefighters and volunteer firefighters. But yes, they are subject to dramatic growth. It would be wise for them to turn their minds to their needs and circumstances and conduct a master fire plan. Whether they are or not is not obligated for them to do, but the council is still on the hook that they are providing services for the municipality in accordance with its needs and circumstances. Given that the legislation affords for opportunities to look beyond your borders to help to provide that services, I think it would behoove them to look at those opportunities for either automatic aid or fire protection agreements to help, or for looking at consolidating fire services further to the way that Aurora and Newmarket have done with Central York. Those are all things which could and probably should be considered by the elected officials, but it's not technically mandated. A couple of times the fire marshal's office has come in, or back in '98, I believe, the fire marshal's office was involved in a review of the regional fire service and recommended that the regional fire services be amalgamated into one fire department. There's been other initiatives similar to that, but it's not really obligatory that the individual municipalities will consider that or look at that in detail and how they're going to provide their services in accordance with their needs and circumstances.
So for water safety, there's specific legislation that requires we do certain things and has consequences failure to do so. The official plan is required to be reviewed every 5 years, but there's no legislated requirement to do a fire master plan apart from good planning on the municipality's point of view.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Why don't we take a break then, and back at our agenda calls for being back at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Paul. That's been helpful.
Pleasure, sir.
And then we'll look forward to the fire master plan discussion at that point. Thank you. Take a break till 1 o'clock. Lunch is in Okay, I'll reconvene our workshop then and turn this over to the chief for some introductory comments on the next section, which relates to the Fire Services Master Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today we're joined by Steve Thurlow and Suzanne Charbonneau from Dillon Consulting. They're here to go over the Master Fire Plan outline as we were directed by the JCC to bring this plan back for some further discussion at this workshop. Steve Thurlow was the former fire chief in Burlington. He and I have crossed paths many times over the years in the service, and he brings a high degree of professionalism to this plan. Obviously, Suzanne has a background in engineering, and she makes sure that all the details of the plan and the mapping and the GIS and all those things pull together. Well, I'd like to say that prior to taking Dillon on as the consultant for this project, our prior version of the Master Fire Plan was done internally. And while it was an excellent plan and it laid out all the steps that the fire service should take over the 2008-2017 period, there are provisions to do a 5-year review of master fire plans, and as such we decided to take a reach outside of the department and solicit the assistance of a consultant. And I'm sure Steve and Suzanne will be able to fill you in on the details of how many of these plans they do, but we've had a great framework to start from, and as such they've developed a plan and are here to discuss that with council today. So without any further delay, Steve Thurlow.
Obviously, it's our pleasure to be here this afternoon. This has been a collaborative process, I think, since the onset, both working with staff and members of council and the public. Our understanding of today is that this is a workshop format, and that members of council, I suspect, may want to ask some more detailed questions than maybe you've had a chance to in the past, which I think is very appropriate. A number of you attended the recent stakeholder session, the public session, so you will have seen components of this presentation in the past. What we have tried to do to prepare today is to give you an overview with as much detail as we possibly can, to try to go down the path that we think you may be as a council dealing with, certainly some of the economic challenges of this plan, and certainly the process and understanding of it. I'm going to get into a little bit of firefighting 101 as I go through it. I find that sometimes it's a little easier to hear it from someone like myself and not the chief, to give you a little bit better understanding of how you deliver your services, and particularly in relation to, you've had some discussion this morning about other comparable municipalities. I will tell you that since I've been doing this work over the past 6 years, we have worked with a number of your neighbors, worked with a number of other municipalities your size, both across the province, within the GTA, and actually across Canada. So while we may not be able to give you some hard, specific data, we can certainly enlighten you on what we see as the experience in the industry across Canada. What I'd like to suggest, Mr. Mayor, with your approval, as it is a workshop, I have about 60 slides, which would typically take me a minute or two a slide. I would prefer if we could go through this slide by slide, and if you have any questions on that particular slide, we deal with it as we go. My reason for that is, if we get too far ahead and someone has a question, it may impact where we go in the rest of the presentation. So I'll put that to you, sir. It's obviously your decision of council, but
Generally speaking, what we find is some questions are answered later on in the presentation. Are there any pause points in the presentation that might be a good time to go back over? Or
absolutely. The presentation is it's built in divisions and sections, so maybe at each section, then we can take a
Maybe
pause
that might be
and do it
better.
that way.
If each section leads to the next, maybe we can do it at that point.
Sure.
And capture some efficiencies if we could. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, just as an outline of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to give you a little bit of an overview. I'm going to duplicate a little bit of what the deputy talked about this morning, talk about some of the background. I want to make sure that you understand how important community risk has become in this process, and certainly within the industry. We're going to talk a little bit about what your existing conditions are. That's where I'm going to talk more about what Firefighting 101 looks like with the Central York Fire Services, and then we're going to spend some time walking through each one of the recommendations. When I do that, what I really want to concentrate on with you is that you understand where the recommendations have come from, and particularly where some of them have been flowing through from the last plan to this plan, and where we see they may want to go in the future. So we've actually bulleted some of those so you can see, and then certainly at the end we have questions and discussions. I do have a habit of speaking a little quickly, so at one of those breaks, Mr. Mayor, if you want to slow me down, feel free, or speed me up. What is a fire master plan? In our view, it's definitely a comprehensive evaluation of everything the department does. It's a very detailed analysis of looking at all of the services, certainly the staffing, the agreements, in comparison to legislated standards, as Paul talked about this morning, and best practices. Best practices is a term I personally have a lot of challenge with, and what is the definition of best practices, and we'll talk about that and give you some insight into that as we go through it. We think a fire master planning process is an opportunity to look at different ways of doing business, alternative service deliveries based on evidence, and everything within this plan, in our view, is supported by an evidence-based analysis. At the end of the day, a fire master plan, in our view, should relate very much to a lot of the planning you do in other areas, like your strategic planning process, your official planning process. It becomes a framework for how you're going to deliver fire protection services. And as the legislation says, it must be based on the local needs and circumstances. I can tell you that having been doing this for the past 6 years fairly intensely, I've not come across two communities that deliver fire protection the same way. They are very unique. We may have red fire trucks that look the same, but the way we staff them, operate them, and the types of calls we go to can be very, very different. Having done a lot of work just along the 400 corridor, I can tell you that the level of services change and do significant change as you drive along that 400 corridor. Go ahead. Similar to some of the other planning documents you do, it should serve as a framework. It's not going to tell you what to do tomorrow morning. It needs to be looked at in the context of the short-term 1 to 3, 5-year, and 10-year planning horizons. Very much needs to look at both your existing risk and how we project what the future risk conditions are going to look like. Your planning people and your resources have certainly helped us to do that. We want to make sure that the Central York Fire Services is attaining the legislative responsibilities for both communities that it serves. And where possible, we've tried to include as much public and stakeholder consultation into the development and certainly on the service level performance targets. The deputy talked to you this morning about this. I'll just highlight it, that one of our roles is certainly to ensure that as we look at the documentation and the evidence that you are meeting your legislative standards on the FPPA, or provide recommendations where we think change or evolution needs to occur. Go ahead. Particularly in these 4 components, ensuring that the simplified risk assessment is being conducted on a regular basis, that you have a smoke alarm program, now including the CO detectors, that you do have a fire safety education program, and that you are conducting the inspections as you are required. Go ahead. B of it, as Paul spoke to this morning, is really about everything else. In my view, this is really about the fire suppression, service delivery pieces, in what level of service you deem as a council you're going to provide to the community. The way that I would suggest best practices within the industry is today is to do that through looking at community risk, looking at your liability, certainly looking at your financial capabilities, and talking to the community and understanding what their expectations are. I like to use the example with my clients that we are all working for Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith lives in a 2-story single-family dwelling anywhere in Ontario. And I can tell you that the level of services we provide to her from this industry are very different depending on where she's located. I also want to recognize that what the industry is learning is we have to help Mrs. Smith look after herself. And you'll see throughout this presentation, that's a significant evolution of this industry in Ontario, particularly using the new models. Okay, go ahead. And this would be the model. It's been in place for a number of years, but certainly this fire marshal, under his jurisdiction and his time frame, is emphasizing the importance of those first 2 lines of defense. Public education and prevention and the use of the standards and the codes. His rationale for that in the speaking engagements I've listened to is that he's very clearly done a lot of research into a number of serious fires in this province, including fatalities, that have looked at the fact because we didn't have either early detection, early notification, or a home escape plan, we still didn't have the resolve that we wanted. We had unfortunate situations. And so his driver is definitely to work with the fire chief to enhance and optimize everything we can do to change human behavior. And I've used the example many, many times to talk about it's taken us decades to change the use of seat belts. We need to have the same kind of strategy to change human behavior as how it relates to home smoke alarms and home escape plannings. Those are very much Mrs. Smith's responsibilities, and we need to help her and educate her on how to use those tools. At the end of the day, though, as a municipality, we do have to have fire suppression, which is the 3rd line of defense, and we look to those 4 bullet points to help us determine what that level of service is going to be. So just a little bit of background of what brought us to today.
Maybe before we get into background, are there any questions? This might be a pause point. Councillor Twinney.
I have a quick question. You talk about emphasizing public education, prevention, fire safety. Those are the key. That's the most important thing that we should be looking at. So would you say, like through the master fire plan, that those, if we were to sort of maybe categorize what we should be doing as being the most important, should we be looking at anything that sort of falls under that category as being the most important thing we should be doing first? I mean, what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is, I mean, obviously the master fire plan has lots of recommendations that we should be doing. So for us, maybe as JCC or as a council, should we be looking at those areas there are the most important and giving them a higher priority perhaps to other areas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to talk about that very point numerous times through the presentation. And what I'm going to suggest to you is we need to balance some things here. If I was in your shoes, that's what I'm going to be looking for. We need to balance those 3 lines of defense. Absolutely, in this province, we're doing everything we can to optimize or enhance those first 2 lines of defense. And if you look at the risk analysis and our application of the risk tools from the Fire Marshal's office, you'll see that there's a number of strategies that can reduce the probability and the consequences of an event in this area. A lot of them, or the majority of them, are directly related to fire prevention activities, public education activities. So from that perspective, I would absolutely try to prioritize those areas. I cannot say that without also saying to you, however, at the end of the day, we need to provide an adequate level of fire suppression to a growing community. And this happens to be 2 communities. And so I think your challenge as a council is going to be find that balance between the 2. But I can tell you that the report speaks clearly to where we can gain reductions in the probability of a fire happening, and the consequences, they will always lead towards the prevention and education activities.
Okay.
Changing human behavior.
Thank you. Okay, background then.
So just to briefly talk about, in 2008, as the chief spoke to, You did an internal fire master plan. Within that report, there were 92 tasks. That, to the best of my knowledge, was the first step towards creating the strategic framework and the performance levels that you have in place today that came out of the Joint Services Agreement. It was the first step. Here we are a number of years down the road, and we're going to talk as we walk through the recommendations where you've achieved some very, very good success, where some of those recommendations from the 2008 report weren't either fully implemented or weren't implemented at all, and where that's brought you to today. And then we're going to take the planning from 2008, look at the assumptions that were made. And I always say to my clients, this is a strategic framework. It's based on assumptions. There's some planning assumptions in here. There's some economic assumptions in here. Those can change. And so this plan, as much as it is today, needs to be dynamic. My advice to you is to keep it up to date as you go forward, and it's always to look at those assumptions, particularly when we're looking at growth. We have an active construction industry right now. When I drove here this morning, not often you see carpenters working at 14 below, but they're out there working. That's what the industry's telling you. We need to watch that, because that's a part of this plan. Excuse me. A very important piece that I think should be given credit to this council, previous councils, and this joint agreement you have is you have set forth some performance measures. The first one deals with initial response, which you'll hear me speak of quite a bit this afternoon. Initial response means the first crew responding to Mrs. Smith's house. You've set this goal as what you're striving to achieve. On the second one, deals with the depth of response, which is the total number of firefighters you're initially going to deploy to Mrs. Smith's house. It's very easy for us as a third party to see where these objectives came from. They're driven out of well-recognized standards, North American standards, and some of the leading industry research into these two areas. All support that those are the kinds of performance we would want to see, certainly from a large urban center like yourselves. Excuse me, go ahead. Just a little bit of background where our observations, certainly from that 2008 report, the department as a whole has made a lot of great steps. I think what you're seeing in this report is the shift within the industry to look at firefighter deployment from a different perspective, one that concentrates very much on what's happening at the fire scene. And I can say that that comes from research that's happening every day that gives us more understanding. Some of the most recent being that I want to talk to you about what's called a fire propagation curve, which times how a fire grows. And I want to tell you that the research is indicating that in my career, we used to see a fire grow at a certain speed. 10 years ago, it was not uncommon to see a flashover occur in a room in 5 or 6 minutes from after the fire started. Today, we're seeing that happen in half the time. We're seeing it happen in 3 to 4 minutes. Now, there's some reasons for that. One reason is our home construction, our building construction, is a heck of a lot more efficient. Our houses are tighter, they're closed envelope, there's not much air circulation. The second piece is the type of furnishings and materials we're using to build the houses. They burn a lot faster and they burn a lot hotter. So ensuring that our tasks align with the understanding of how that fire's behavior is going to happen is very, very important, not only to Mrs. Smith, but also to our firefighters, and ensuring we have the right number of firefighters on scene to effectively and efficiently deal with that fire. A lot of that's driven by risk. We're going to talk quite a bit about community risks this afternoon. Certainly, I'm going to talk about growth. I think you're being challenged. The department is being challenged by two different things. One being intensification, and the second being your greenfield build-out. I want to acknowledge the fact that I have many, many, many clients that wish they could have the kind of model that you have. The consolidated service of providing one fire department to two communities is the envy of many communities across this province who have a number of barriers in front of them to get to where you are. My experience tells me that if you didn't have this model, I would still be sitting here giving you very much the same report just as the town of Newmarket. And in 20 minutes, I'd drive up the street and tell the town of Aurora exactly the same thing. And you would be duplicating it. You're not. As much as this may seem as a big challenge, both economically and growth, it is still far superior to doing it independently. I do want to talk about your training. Deputy talked about it a little bit this morning, but it is a very, very important element that, quite frankly, if we're really, really good at the first two lines of defense and we have less fires, which is our ultimate goal, it puts more emphasis on the importance of that training. Go ahead. Mr. Mayor, there's another point to stop. Any other questions as we go?
Okay.
Perfect. So community risk, we work with the guidelines that the Fire Marshal's Office has developed that very much support what the industry has recognized. The list in front of you is the various risk factors that we looked at in developing the risk profile. Go ahead, Suzanne. Just some of the overview of what that looks like. Certainly you're very, very familiar with this. You're going to have growth. It's a little bit different depending on whether you're in Newmarket or whether you're in Aurora. But from the Central York Fire Services perspective, they're going to be dealing with more people, more buildings, more structures, which all relate to more risk. Excuse me. Go ahead. So what we do is we use the Fire Marshal's guidelines to develop a model that talks about 4 types of risk. Low risk, moderate risk, high risk, and there's actually an extreme risk. I can tell you in all of the municipalities we've done, even with nuclear facilities, we've still not run into an extreme risk facility. What we do typically see is on that map, in the gold represents the moderate risk, which is typically your residential dwellings, residential occupancies. The high risk, where you see some of the red blotches across the model, are typically your vulnerable facilities. A hospital will be there, a care facility will be in there. Excuse me. When we look at moderate risk, I like to refer to that as the most vulnerable risk. And the reason I say that is it is well known and well fact-based that our most vulnerable risk is residential occupancies where we sleep at night. That's where the majority of fire fatalities occur, and that's where the majority of our dollar loss occurs. So it may not present itself as the highest risk, but in our industry it is definitely the most vulnerable risk. And so what you see in the legend is based on 2 performance objectives, one being a 4-minute travel time and one being an 8-minute travel time. You can see the type of coverage that we have. And this is important for us as a consultant to look at what your current capabilities are. So in a 4-minute travel time, you're able to provide coverage to 67% of your moderate risk. On an 8-minute, so the depth of response, almost 100% of the time. And so those become the baselines for us as we start to look at your service level. Go ahead. Excuse me. Go ahead. And so 3 of the factors that we looked at, and again, the deputy spoke a little bit about this morning, what makes up total response time? Consistently across the industry, we break it down into these 3 measures. Dispatch time being the time from when Mrs. Smith picks up the phone until she gets a hold of someone on the other end. And your performance measure for that is 60 seconds. Turnout time being the time from when the firefighters receive the call until they're ready to respond. So they are on the truck, literally ready to drive out the front door of the station. And your current performance objective for that is 60 seconds. And then travel time, the time from when the truck leaves the station until it actually gets to the incident. And your current performance objective for that is 4 minutes. So you have a combined, as I indicated before, a 6-minute total response time that you're trying to achieve 90% of the time. That's the baseline that we've applied. That's your current agreement with the other municipality. It's well documented within your joint services agreement. Excuse me. Right? And so as you fully well, we've identified where the 4 stations are. We've also identified where the training center is. I think it's important to recognize that although you may think simply in the concept that you have 4 fire stations, you have 5 facilities. And part of our strategy when we approached this project was to look at ways to mitigate, bring together, or not increase the number of overall facilities. And so that was one of our strategic priorities, was not to add to the building infrastructure. And we think we've been able to do that. Excuse me, right? Within the report, you will see a lot of the historical evidence and data that we use. This particular table looks at the total call volume over the period 2009 to 2013. It's interesting for us that you had a blip in 2009, but when we look at 10, 11, 12, and 13, there's some incremental increase, but there isn't a great big spike. It's not uncommon for us to find some spikes. I suggest within the report that what this starts to show to us is a fairly proactive prevention and education program that appears to be working well. You're not having, some 15 or 20% increases in call volumes. You've got some relatively small increases incrementally to the population growth and the change in the demographics and the building stock. When we break this down into the number of fire-related calls, what you see is that they represent 29% of the total calls. We break that down further, and what you actually see is the number of real fires is only about 3%. That's not uncommon. That's quite consistent, both within this province and across Canada, that the total call volume of a fire department on the fire side would be 3 to 5%. Very, very common. If that was up 8 or 10%, I'd be looking really hard at what your prevention and education program looks like. It would be an indicator. Excuse me, go ahead. So we take all of that data and we look at your overall geography, and what you see plotted on that map in those little black dots are the calls over that period where we've systematically located them based on their location. Now we've applied your initial response performance target, which is that 4 minutes of travel time. We've calibrated that both on the road network, so the speed limits and the types of roads, and then we've calibrated it based on your historical call locations. And what you see in the legend is that in a 4 minute or less travel time, you are currently able to cover 60% of the area, so the geography of both municipalities, which has reflected 71% of the historical calls. Now this gives us a good understanding of what your current benchmarks are. What's more important to us from a planning perspective is the area covered. We can't predict where calls are going to occur in the future. We know because of growth they're not going to occur in the same place. So we use these 2 benchmarks to help guide us where we're going to go. What I want you to do, if you can, is to visualize that map in the purple represents the 4 minutes, the gold represents the 5 minutes, and the orange is greater than 5 minutes. What this tells us initially, having our experience, and certainly the partner I work with has been doing this for over 25 years, there is a gap in the middle of the 2 municipalities. From just a blush perspective, I can see the gap in the middle. I can also see the orange on the outer perimeters. That's not uncommon. That's exactly the type of picture we see with most of the communities. It's very difficult to service your borders. That's where things like automatic aid agreements can serve to help you significantly both on initial response and depth response. But when it gets into the core of the service area, that's where it very much stems back to the service provider, the primary provider. So initially for us, when we started the project, we could see the beginning of the gap in the middle. Clear to us how it's there when you look at the two municipalities. Very, very clear to see why the 4 fire stations were located where they were based on the historical governance model of the fire service. Excuse me. Go ahead. So now what you see is when we started the modeling, what happens if you try to fill in the gap. You can certainly see where we've added the 5th fire station in the middle. We certainly tried a number of different models to find where we thought it would be most effective. What you're seeing here now is we've jumped from up to a 71% of the area covered. So we're improving the 4-minute response coverage. And you can see visually how much bigger the purple is. I also want you to concentrate on the gold as well, that in that 5-minute, we're up to almost 89%, almost to the 90 percentile. And what we don't do within the modeling is we don't measure the 4 minutes and 15 seconds, 4 minutes and 30 seconds, 4 minutes and 45, but you can visualize if you split that gold in half where 4 minutes and 30 seconds we could be. Excuse me, go ahead. And so we conduct the same type of exercise for the depth of response. Now your current performance target is 12 firefighters. You will see within the report, it's our recommendation that you increase that to 14 firefighters, and that comes from the evidence that out of the NFPA, which is certainly one of the leading standards within the industry, certainly the work that the fire marshal's done, and our interpretation of what would be leading practices. Not necessarily best practices, but certainly some of your comparators. And again, looking at those critical fire ground tasks, to Mrs. Smith's house, we believe you should be deploying 14 instead of 12. What we've done for the planning process is to show you both. So what you see here is that in the purple on the map, your existing conditions for the ability to deploy 14 firefighters within the 8 minutes and the 12 firefighters within the 8 minutes. And what you see in the legend is 12 firefighters on the coverage are able to get their 81%. On the actual calls, it was 88%. On the 14, you can see that you're almost half on both instances. Excuse me. What I want to concentrate before I leave that slide, Suzanne, is just that you understand from a firefighting 101 perspective what your staffing level is. And so if you look at the other legend, you can see that at each of the stations there is a pump. So you have 4 stations today. Each has a pump. Each of those pumps is staffed by 4 firefighters. Then at 2 of the stations, one has a platform and one has an aerial, and they are also staffed with 4. That's your total complement of firefighters if everybody came to work on the same day. But that's not your minimum staffing. Your minimum staffing, in my view, is currently driven by your collective agreement. Your collective agreement requires you to staff 5 vehicles with 4 people plus platoon chief all of the time. That's 21 firefighters. That's your minimum. What the chief tries to do is consistently staff a 6th vehicle with 4 firefighters. I think he's done a pretty effective job of keeping that model in place, because what it allows you to do is manage your overtime costs. That 6 vehicles not included within the manning and staffing clause of the collective agreement, and so he's able to manage the number of firefighters that are on either the aerial or the platform. Now that can change on a day-to-day basis depending on who comes to work. What the experience shows us is that that 6th truck is there a lot of the time, but not all of the time. You have to remember, as I've said, I think that's an effective strategy he's used to apply to make sure your overtime stays within a relatively manageable number. Working with some other clients of similar sizes, managing that overtime is a significant challenge. I just want to identify to you that that is one strategy, I think, in this model that's working very, very well, is having that flexibility of the sixth apparatus. Excuse me. Okay, go ahead. So now what you see is the beginning of us saying to ourselves, if we wanted to make some improvement, how would we go about it? We've plotted the fifth station on this particular model, and certainly within the report, you'll see a number of different versions of the modeling efforts. This is our preferred model. In this model, which is what I would consider is the minimum, because it sustains the staffing level identified within the collective agreement, 5 crews, 4 firefighters plus the platoon chief, so your minimum staffing of 21. What we would have in this model is a pump at each station. 5 stations, 5 pumps, plus your platoon chief. You would not have an in-service platform or aerial in this model. Now, that's not the recommended model that we've identified. We've recommended that you need to incrementally start staffing for the fifth station. If one was to consider, could you open the fifth station without hiring additional staff, this is the model that you would be looking at. The challenges with it are the fact that you don't have a staffed area. Now, I'll tell you that in my experience, aerials are used at fires maybe 10 or 15% of the time. Remember, fires only account for about 3 to 5% of your calls. So aerials aren't used a lot, but I will tell you, when a fire chief needs an aerial, he needs it right now. He doesn't need it in an hour from now. He needs it right now. From our experience in working with other clients, I will tell you that some communities apply a strategy whereby I use the phrase, they put the boots in the middle. So in a fire station, there would be an aerial truck on one door and a pump on the other door, and the firefighter's boots are in the middle. And depending on the type of call would determine the type of truck you take. We're doing a lot of work in Vancouver right now, and I can tell you that is the model that particular department is built upon. They're called crossover units. It works effectively, works very efficiently, but it does still have its challenges. The challenges are the fact that in today's model, you have 2 stations with staff with 2 trucks. So you have some depth within that district. So if the pump is at a medical call, you still have a truck that can respond to a fire call if it comes while that truck's committed. In this model, you would not have that kind of redundancy or depth within the station model. Every time one of those pumps is committed at any type of a call, whether it be a fire call, an MVA, or a medical call, that district would be empty. You don't have that kind of a depth. So it's not to say that this model wouldn't work for you. I just want you to recognize that there are some challenges with it. Another challenge is the fact that, without question, in our view, this community is going to continue to grow, both of them, the service area. So call volume will continue to grow. So that potential, that consequence is going to continue to grow, right? Any questions on that one? Because I think this is an important piece of your decision making. Okay, Worship, I'll keep going.
Keep going.
Go.
That's the next one.
Oh, there's the next one? Okay, I'm sorry. So now what you see is we've started to incrementally add the crews. In this case, what we've done is we've added back one of the aerials. And over the next couple of slides, you'll just see how we systematically move it around to find what the best location would be, optimal to the whole service area. Now, remember, I'm not talking about whether it be in Aurora or Newmarket. That really makes no difference to me. This is how the Central York Fire Services provides their service. In this particular situation, you'll see we've put it at station 4.2. Go ahead. In the next one, you'll see we've moved it to 4.3. And then in the last one, you'll see, I think we put it in the new station in the middle. Excuse me. There's very small variance in where you put it. What's important, though, is what that extra crew does is it dramatically increases the depth of response capabilities across the entire service community. So you get, I think, a significant level of coverage from that one additional crew that helps both communities address the depth. If I was to have two maps right now and be able to show you the purple coverage today versus the purple coverage under this model, you'd see some very, very significant difference. Excuse me, go ahead. Ultimately, what you see here, though, is we actually went a step further and said, what if we kept the model that we have today, which is a pump in each station and two aerials, one aerial north and one aerial south. I think if I was sitting in the fire chief's shoes across the table here, this would be the model that he would ultimately like to get to, more than likely within the 10-year horizon of this plan, when we're looking at the factors I talked about. So the increase in call volume, the number of times we have two calls happening at the same time, certainly the increase in risk as far as the population and the building stock increases, and your overall capabilities to sustain the level of service you have today. Go ahead.
Okay, another pause point. Questions, Regional Councillor?
Thanks very much. I got a few questions here, I guess. Just trying to understand. My first question would probably be, to what degree, I mean, we heard a bit about in the preamble about growth in the community, rapid growth in these two areas, and I assume that's part of the analysis. But when I look at the call volume, I guess you can look at it different ways. My view of it is the call volume looks fairly consistent and does not suggest significant change, and certainly does not, over a 5-year period, doesn't suggest the kind of change one might see with growth. How heavily is that influenced in your modeling? The fact that it doesn't appear we're having the kind of call volume growth to go with population growth?
In the modeling, it's relative to the fact that to sustain the same level of service you have today, based on the increased number on the population side, but also the increased building stock, our modeling suggests that at sometime in the next 10 years, again, I always relate to back, we're based on the current growth pattern, to sustain the level of service you have today, that's what our recommendations are based upon. So yeah, that chart doesn't show a significant gain over a 4-year period, but if we cast that out over the next 10 years, plus look at your growth, plus look at the fact you've done in that 5-year period, I'd suggest some pretty proactive prevention and education you're going to start seeing some of the benefit of it, but those lines are going to start to meet. That's how we come to our conclusion on the growth side.
You were mentioned earlier well, two things I guess I'd like to understand. The current standard that was set under the last master fire plan. To Councillor Hempin's point earlier, are you in any position to tell me, through your experience, what percentage of municipalities in Ontario have that standard, meet that standard, or exceed that standard? As a policy setting, I'm not talking about what we actually, where we might go, but just in terms of where we're at.
I'll preface it by our experience. So without question, municipalities aren't legislated to that standard.
Right.
It is not uncommon for us to see that type of performance objective within the greater GTA area and the large urban communities. You get outside of a municipality of 100,000 people, you're not going to see that kind of a performance objective. Okay? to some of your comparables within the greater GTA area, they're using the same or similar performance objective. And I'd say that you're in the ballpark today on your experience and how you're achieving it.
And so when you say same or similar, I guess I'm thinking similar if it was, a difference like 85 or 80% could do quite a bit to a map. Are some of them, do you mean similar in that sense, that they might be close, so?
On the percentage of achievement.
Right.
They're also similar in the kind of manner that they're written. So a large basis is the NFPA standard. Yours is 3 instead of 4, but similar on the time requirements. There are other standards or other municipalities that would take the NFPA standard letter by letter and say 4 firefighters in 4 minutes of travel time, but perhaps they would reduce it down to 80% of the time or change that portion of the target. So on both sides, how often it's being achieved and also how it's derived as a performance target.
Are you aware of any with higher than 90%?
No.
In the GTA, are you aware of many with lower than 90%?
Yes.
Okay. The issue you raised earlier about moving to 14 firefighters, that's not NFPA, is it?
Yes.
It is? That's the standard under NFPA?
Yes.
And you said it was leading edge as opposed to, I think was the phrase, as opposed to best practice. So.
Because I have a hard time defining what best practice is.
Okay, so who is employing the leading edge at this point?
I would suggest to you, in my reference, that's towards the GTA type municipalities.
Can you give me some examples, or?
Well, Markham would be targeting slightly above that. So Markham tends to aim for 16 arriving on scene. The NFPA standard is 14 plus another if an aerial is on scene. So it actually is 15. London would be another urban area that targets the 14. Mississauga as well tends to deploy up to the 16 firefighters. Oshawa would be another.
Okay.
Ajax.
Yep.
Thank you. My last question for now, I think, but it's an interesting one. I'm struggling with the. I think you said earlier on in the presentation, I have a feeling if you were making this presentation, both towns would be the same presentation. And I guess I'm struggling with that a little bit, in the sense that when I look at the existing initial response and the corresponding maps that indicate the changes, and then I look at the depth of response, there's two things I notice. One is that by targeting the St. John Side Road, which appears fairly central, but is also coincidentally the border between the two municipalities, or not coincidentally, the number of, I'd be curious to know what number of homes is taken out of the over 5 minutes and the under 5 minutes. So the two colors that we're addressing here, I think I'm getting this right. This is a lot for us to take in. I hope you can appreciate. But the orange and the yellow and the orange, I think you were referring to the colors as, how many homes are taken out by placing the fire station there? And how many would be taken out if it was put somewhere in the northwest or the northern quadrant, so more between those two areas at the very top? It just appears to me that, and then I look at that, and that's just pure initial response. And I'm thinking you might actually eliminate more homes from those two risk levels, if we can call them that, than you would putting it centrally. And I don't know if you have that data. But then I go to the next thought I had, which was I look at the maps that you've talked about, the depth of response, and again trying to take it all in, but it appears to me that the impact, the existing depth of response is actually in the area affected by a fifth station, if I'm reading this right, is actually fairly decent. But all of this modeling doesn't impact nearly as much the depth of the response, again, in that northern portion. And I know you've explained, well, we can rely on mutual aid, et cetera. Well, I don't know if this is how delicate I should be, but we're bordering King and East Gwillimbury. And And then I would say, well, if we're going to talk about relying on those communities, A, we should know the depth of their service, but then shouldn't we do a similar modeling as to where their stations are and what the response? And so I guess that's a long way of saying I'm surprised that a modeling of the two towns separately wouldn't come up with a different response. And I'm even surprised that, or I guess I would ask the question, was this not a bit of a difficult decision to talk about? Let's never talk about the timeline. Let's just talk about when a fifth station comes, that the data would drive it to that central location, as opposed to, for example, and I'm not even talking about Aurora right now. I'll leave that to Aurora to analyze, and the northern portion of our community. So I've talked long enough. I'm sure you're dying to answer.
The one point I would say is not all of the modeling plots are in the presentation, just to be aware of that.
Sorry, what does that mean?
So we only had an allotted time for this discussion, so we've kind of put up the pieces to tell the story, but there are more kind of options and plots and scenarios within the full master plan itself. So with the model of the staffing that Steve explained and how the aerial truck may be at one of two stations, it kind of flip-flops where your depth of response coverage is. So that's one thing to keep in mind as to whether or not it's coverage in the north shown or coverage in the south shown. So that just kind of gets that off the table. And the other piece is that we will, without a doubt, show that station locations and adding a new station will always have the biggest impact on your initial response. Your depth of response is much more about where you place your firefighters and how you staff the department. But without a doubt, initial response is going to show the biggest impact of a station.
Anything to add? No. I guess so that I'd ask. So I guess I'd ask the question: if the one, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but it's been mentioned already. The idea that we need to locate a station in this area in 1 to 2 years, which, from my limited knowledge around this table, makes it close to impossible to achieve on that timeline, but we'll leave that aside. If it's an imperative to address it because of the kinds of standards we're striving to meet, are we not leaving the same situation or the same level of risk or the level of risk intact in the northern part of the service area or the northern part of Newmarket, even though we're addressing this? So another way of phrasing, if it's so necessary that we address it in 1 to 2 years, how is it not equally necessary or recommended that we address the northern portion? And the last part I'd say is I'm still curious if we have data about the number of homes that are addressed by the station located here as opposed to in the north.
I think I understand your question. In the ideal world, I would go down the path that you're going. But we would have to figure a way to service the entire community with the same level of service everywhere. The price tag alone with that would be enormous. I think what we've tried to do strategically is, first of all, not look at two communities. We've tried to look at the service level area this department provides and looking at future growth, future development for the whole community, and how do we strategically improve it across all the boundaries. And I guess that's to my point individually. Individually, if I was in Newmarket, the station to the north, where you're headed, makes absolute sense to me. No different than if I went into Aurora, I would come with a different conclusion. When I look at the service area that this department's trying to provide incrementally, and again, to try to improve the service across the entire service level, I think we've come at it, that's the strategic direction we took. Ideally, it would be no surprise to me in 5 years from today, you're absolutely talking about the next priority is a sixth station in Newmarket. And my rationale for that is the gap you've already talked about, whatever intensification is going to happen there, and the fact that, quite frankly, automatic aid or mutual aid is not an option on the north end. It's definitely an option on the south end. For that rationale, that's where I would take it. Today, based on what we know, What we've tried to put to you is the stepping stones to get to where you're going to have to be at some point. Eventually, I think there will be 6 stations under the jurisdiction of the Central York Fire Service.
And we
the
don't
data?
have specific home data, the numbers of homes covered. What we do have is within the risk model, so if we'll just, again, flip back with that. So this is based on your land use and some of the information we can pull out from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and that's how we build that moderate risk level. So that moderate risk is buildings that are either residential or commercial for the most part. So that gives us a visual idea as close as possible, but we don't have the specific statistics number-wise, what's covered, number of homes. And I'm not even sure where we could access that.
Am I correct that our staff internally could probably look at this, the 2 areas that are in question under existing initial response and the area that's ameliorated through the location of the station, and then look at the north and do some sort of compare? I mean, I could be wrong, but I keep looking at it, and when I look at it, it looks to me like there's potentially more residences beneficially affected in the north, and when I layer on top of that the depth of response, which I would assume have a greater positive impact in the north than it does in the center, according to what I'm looking at, I'd be curious. So,
Yep. Mr. Sheldon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that is something that could be done by our GIS people in both municipalities. What it would also take into account is some of those areas are not developable, so that would be taken out of the equation as well, like in Aurora with if they have Oak Ridges Marine Land, Core Natural Heritage. But I think that's something that could be done. It could be done fairly up to date as well, as development has taken place more recently in different areas of the 2 communities. So that could be done. The other thing I wanted to mention, just in terms of our neighbors, we have been trying for a couple of years through the N6 initiative to line up our our fire master plans, so that when someone goes out to do a fire master plan, that it's not done in isolation. That was in the last report that came into all of the councils, I think, last year. And there is an effort going on in that regard. It's a challenge to get that done, but what we wanted to do is to have some sort of standard terms of reference that could be used as each municipality goes forward, short of doing it all together. And that, for example, if East Gwillimbury is looking for a station in that area that you're referring to, just north of there, or we are, then you look at, how can you do it better by having a larger group at the table. So that each initiative of the N6 is spearheaded by one of the municipal CAOs. That is spearheaded by Georgina, and the fire chiefs have been meeting over the last probably 12 months or so, trying to look at what can be done in the future, but that will take some time.
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bay?
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. Let me just direct you to, first, thank you very much. This is very informative. Direct you to slides 20 and 21. And it speaks to existing initial response, which is now, today. And then with an addition of a fire station generally in the center, I'm only seeing a marginal increase. I'm seeing that, with a 5-minute response, it goes from 86% coverage to 89%. That's 3%, and perhaps I just don't understand this, but that seems like a huge expense for such a marginal increase in efficiency. 3%. Maybe you can talk about that, and why is that significant? So much cost for such a marginal increase. Slides 20 and 21.
Which column you're looking at?
Pardon?
It's percentage of area coverage. You're going from 82 to 89%.
Yeah, within 4 minutes. No, I'm looking at 80. If you look at number 20.
Yeah, it's percent of the area covered. So in the existing
82.
conditions.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But percentage of calls covered also.
So we can't predict where the future calls are. So when we show existing versus the future, we look at comparing the area covered, since we don't have a future call plot. So that's, yeah, so it's a
Oh, I'm sorry, I see what I'm
82%
doing. I'm
area
just looking at the
covered.
final column, and that wasn't,
area
it was
covered. Yeah, it is
incorrect.
it's a little confusing.
Okay, so it's a 7% increase.
7%.
Which is a little bit more than the 3%. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the end column, so excuse me for that.
On the 4-minute, which is your current performance objective, there's an 11% increase.
Right.
It goes from 60% to 71%.
Yeah, I see that now, and the 5-minute, it's a 7% increase. Okay. Sorry, I apologize, I was just looking at the end columns of both of them.
Okay. Any other questions from council before we move to the strategic priorities? Oh, yeah, sorry. Chief?
Thank you. I have participated recently in the DCA studies for both communities, both Newmarket and Aurora, and I can tell you that in the next phase, there is already a component for a station in the north end of Newmarket under the DCA study. We have, in fact, looked at the development of the 2C lands in Aurora and up Leslie, that whole area that we have no historical data on because there's not as many houses as there will be later this year. So that's why it took the priority. But you have identified that there are areas of concern, and as Steve has pointed out, we can look at help from our neighbors in the Station 8-2 down in Oak Ridges from the Richmond Hill Fire Service. That's all things that we've been looking at and we're working towards. Just that the pressing need for us at this point was to identify that hole in the center between the two communities.
Can I suggest that to the degree we're able to speak to future stations, I mean, I guess it would have been helpful and I accept it was some time ago when it was done internally, but that if the previous master fire plan spoke to the need for this, to have a fire master plan arrive with, again, respectfully, but with a 1 to 2 year time horizon on it, it does sort of, it'd be nice to have a bit of a further looking planning. So if we know there's another potential station coming and we have a good sense of where it is probably, or that it's in a DC study, that it's referenced somewhere. So there's a bit of an ability for council to see things coming further on the horizon. I think would probably be helpful to have that. Can I also just request that when we're getting the other information, the data on houses with that staff probably, but in terms of the probably coming from yourself, Chief, or through the consultant, is the department historic call volume we have for the last 5 years. Would it be able? I'd be interested to see that data go back further. Do we have that? I assume we do. Yeah. Could we get that maybe sent around? Or okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Move on. Thank you.
So within the report, we've identified what we think are three, what we've phrased as strategic priorities that council should be considering in helping this very much follow on what council's talking about, setting the direction of the plan. First being that the utilization of a comprehensive community risk assessment serve as the baseline, both for accessing the current and future fire protection services. And then the next one being that the optimization of the first two lines of defense, including education and prevention and state standards, form what we believe is the fire protection program based on the needs of the comprehensive risk assessment. So very much what we're suggesting in these two priorities is that the comprehensive risk analysis become a way of business for the department, that it be updated on a regular basis, be brought back to council so you can monitor and identify some of the trends and changes, and that you use that then to develop and prioritize very much as we started this with how can we most effectively reduce the probability and the consequences through strategies that target those first two lines of defense. The third one being that the strategies, wherever possible, support sustainability in providing the most cost-effective, efficient level of fire services, resulting in the best value. I think that's everything that you're trying to do. What we've been saying to a number of our clients recently is that, as members of council are identifying, this needs to be a strategic document. It needs to have some vision, and we think these priorities align with where the industry is going and where council needs to take the fire service. From here, we go into each of the recommendations. Rather than read them, I think what I'll do is just give you some background into them. What this one refers to is the fact that the consolidated agreement will need to be updated, subject to the decision of both councils, and that will also require an update to the establishing and regulating bylaw of both communities. We did find that there was a couple of missing links in the procedural process from the last update that will need to be addressed as you deal with this one. Excuse me. In number 2, we talk about this fact that very much what's been the focus of our last few discussions is the economic impacts of this plan. And so what we're suggesting that as a part of the fire master plan process that, again, you continue to conduct on a 5-year cycle, that you also have a parallel process, such as a financial business plan, that gets into more detail on the operating and capital components, and include that within the master planning process. So in other words, there would be parallel documents, a parallel planning process. I think that would go to address some of the questions that you're raising. I will say to you that that would have been really valuable had we had it this time, and to track some of the recommendations that were made in 2008 that didn't move forward. For example, the 5th station was identified in 2008, but nothing has happened since then, and so now we're doing some catch-up. Same with a number of the staff positions we'll talk about. Excuse me. Number 3 being that, and certainly your staff, certainly and the fire service has the capability and the resources to do this, is that you keep the community risk assessment up to date and that it form part of the annual reporting process to the JCC and to both councils.
Okay, another pause point then, before we go into administration. Regional Councillor?
Just quickly here that this is the number 1. That the fire chief directed to update the following. I assume it's written in a way it sounds like that could come as a recommendation at some point. I don't understand what this is getting at, so I don't know what I'm really directing. It's kind of vague, but I have a feeling it speaks to something more specific that you came across in the process, and I don't know what that is. And
within the body of the report, you'll see that there's some areas within the current agreement that require some rewording, some updating to keep you with the legislation. One of the most significant, I think, is how you deal with your facilities on the ownership side.
Okay.
I think that should be dealt with and updated. I think there was one more, and I can't, was on the legal side. There was a of the facilities.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. Okay. Right. I think Bob wants to add something.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yeah, just briefly, excuse me, on that point, the agreement was originally set up that the moving stock, everything but the land and the buildings became part of Central York. So the 2 municipalities continue to own the assets of the building and the land. The direction coming out of the last fire master plan update was to try to work to merging those assets, and we had embarked upon that. It became very difficult, so I think that that's being repeated as a recommendation to move forward on, and that takes into account, you know, what is the value of the various assets and some plan that would blend them into one service like everything else.
Okay, thanks. And the second question was that which I think is bang on, but the suggestion that a financial business plan, operating capital for the next 5-year cycle, how long would that process take? I mean, Mike Mays is here, but I mean, again, with my experience around this table, which is not as in-depth as others, but I guess I would assume that I would very much like to see us do that now and quickly for this plan so that we understand the implications of what we are or are not moving forward on. And but it seemed to be suggested it would need to be for the next 5-year cycle. So what if we were to embark on this, what would the timeline be?
Mr. Mines?
Through Mr. Mayor, at the last JCC meeting, we did provide updates on the actual 10-year operating and capital inside the villages and the and we included the fire master, a version of the fire master plan update that we had at that time. So it's just a matter of finding where we're going to land on as far as implementation, and we have the model already set up.
Okay, so we can, I guess, deal with that later, but that's something that maybe it could be finalized so staff reviews and ensure that it reflects the most current information and then circulates to members of council.
Mr. Sheldon?
This may be a good point, Mr. Mayor, to just update the council on the direction that I've provided to the chief and to the finance department, and this comes out of a meeting with the CAO of Aurora and their director of finance, and that is what we want to look at are options that could be quantified in terms of what the impact is, and the phasing component that could go with that. And in terms of the 2015 budget, as I was indicating at the committee, we've got this convergence of events where we have a very important fire master plan coming up for approval at the same time as we're trying to finalize the 2015 budget. And one of the options for the committee was to take the position that we would deal with the 2015 budget, taking a look at what was not implemented under the current fire master plan, for example, some priority items, and take the time necessary to get through the fire master plan. The committee moved to go towards having these workshops first. So when we go back to the committee, we will be talking about that. What is a process that could be used that strikes a balance between what needs to be provided in terms of needs, but also options for council to consider in terms of affordability. So that's what we're up to now. That will account for some of what is referred to in the financial business plan. If it doesn't go far enough, it can go as far as it has to set that out for council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about options, it would provide this would provide options, but we would get all the information that was discussed as part of that package, right? And if that's yes, when do you anticipate that occurring?
Hard to say, but what at the committee I had indicated if it takes till June or whatever to approve the fire master plan in whatever form, then so be it. There is, because of the timing of the fire master plan and moving into an election, it was put into the first quarter of this year with councils wanting workshops and to deliberate a little bit further on it. As I say, whatever time it takes. So we were sort of targeting that hopefully we could get through whatever needs to be dealt with as part of the finalization of the fire master plan before the summer break.
Sure. That sounds like a very helpful process. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, why would a financial plan not be part of the overall master plan? Because it has some pretty significant financial implications. Is there a reason why we'd have that as a separate or a companion report as far as the implementation goes?
Mr. Mayor, the answer to that is it was not in the terms of reference. So that's why you're getting some outside advice here, good advice to henceforth included in the terms of reference.
And then the financial plan would come through.
Yeah, as part of the plan. Okay. We would have been doing that internally, in the form that I had set out. I have said continually that there is a need to have a staff report on top of the fire master plan that sets out options and the financial impact, both capital and operating, and that would take you into the area of what's provided for in the DCs. In the DCs, we want to be sure that any development that is coming in is paying its way into the future as well. So, you know, that explains the rationale behind looking not just in the next 5 years, but that full 10-year period.
Okay. And raise your hand if I'm getting into the weeds, but if we transferred the properties into a separate entity under the Central York Fire Services, would that affect our ability to apply for DCs to fund that? And if that's just too much minutia, just tell me that, and we can answer that at a later date.
No, I don't think it would. The one interesting thing with DCs is, for example, let's say that Fire Hall went into East Gwillimbury, and we struck a servicing sharing agreement with them. We can collect DCs in Newmarket in the service area to go towards the construction of that facility and vice versa. So it should not, whether it is Central York as it stands, where the DCs are in two different municipal pots, if you like, we can do it that way. We could do it if we move towards more of a service delivery model, like to have a separate entity called Central York. And that actually was where we got to on the merging of the assets. It became a real challenge, and you're at the point where you need to create an entity, like a separate service board. Does that answer that question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Carry on.
Your Worship, so number 4, I think, is just basically a summary of everything we just talked about. So in the work we did, it's pretty clear to us that the concept of the joint services and the JCC and the agreement was well put together in the beginning, but I think what we've identified is you're at a point in time in your growth that you need to go back and have a look at some things. One of them was the facility side. Another's on the budget side, the way you calculate the costs, there can be some fairly quick impacts on the budget process. We've identified in the report, maybe you want to think about a different timetable on how you determine what the fees are going to be. I suspect over the past few years you've seen some all of a sudden in-year increases either here or in Aurora as a result of the calculation process. And so we're just suggesting that it might be a really good time to go back and look at some of that. Number 5 is a carryover from the 2008 plan that the department look at and create the mission and vision statement. Really important piece for any organization, but particularly a fire service. It's a great way to get some engagement and consultation with staff. We know that. Number 6, within the plan, there are a number of performance objectives in addition to what you already have. There's also some changes to the performance objectives. On your initial response and depth of response, we've suggested you add 20 seconds to reflect changes that have happened to those standards. So it actually would increase those total response times. And again, those need to be looked at and included within the update. Another number 7 being a carryover. And it was our review of the administrative side of the department. There's a part-time position that we believe should be created as full-time. And quite frankly, in my view, this is consistently within the fire service. We have the highly technical people who are doing tasks that can be done by an administrative assistant that can free up some very valuable time. I think you have that occurring in a couple of places where we could get some efficiencies. Next one being that from a technology side, we see a need for a network and communications coordinator. Technology within the department in dealing with 2 communities and ensuring that they stay on top of all of it is an important part of the efficiency and effectiveness you're looking for. And so we've suggested that. In 2008, you had a resource through the human resources that provided, I think, a real valuable asset to the department. That, through whatever means, is not available anymore. we're suggesting that you may want to seriously consider an actual human resources person, maybe not within the fire department, but reporting directly to either the fire chief or director of human resources, or both, to support the HR side of the department. I can tell you in my experience and my observations in working with fire departments, managing the human resources, including the collective agreement, is more than a full-time job. There's a number of items that were in that 2008 plan, like the next bullet that talks about job descriptions and performance programs. You don't have the resources to develop those, in our opinion. That would very much align with this human resource consultant or person. They would be a very effective tool for you, particularly when you're trying to manage overtime costs and attendance programs, all of those things where you're looking to be as effective as possible. So number 10 is a carryover from the 2008 that we definitely think you should move forward with. Another carryover is the concept of professional development, including the succession plan. I'll speak industry-wide right now. There is a significant shuffle across this province at the senior level within the fire service, particularly in the GTA or greater GTA area. A number of fire chiefs, deputy chiefs are reaching that plateau where they're considering retiring or becoming consultants. And I don't think as an industry we've done well to prepare the next generation. I do have the liberty of being a part of some recruitment processes, and I can tell you that the pool is getting smaller and smaller. And I encourage you to start focusing at a succession plan. And outside of the department, I can tell you in my own career, the two of the best years of my career were spent in the city manager's office as a firefighter, learning more about how the corporation worked. So we've talked to the chief about those kinds of opportunities, looking outside of and providing opportunities to mentor and give your supervisors and future leaders more than the technical training of the fire service. Give them some human resource experience, give them some legal experience. Excuse me. Number 12 just simply deals with your relationship with York Police Services, and that there's a need to have an SOG or standing operating procedure be developed for joint responses, how you're going to work together. Same goes with them on opportunities to expand even further what you do as far as shared joint purchasing, both with the police and across the region. I've said to the chief particularly, we've had some discussions about your North 6 opportunities. We think those are a great spot to start talking about enhancing the foundation you've already created with a number of them. Any questions?
Before we go into the fire
Sure.
prevention, and maybe it's part of the fire prevention, we talk about on page 13 performance measures, and the only performance measures that I'm reading, and maybe I'm missing some, relates to on-site arrival. But is there or has there been some examples of where we have performance measures that relate to the top two priorities that are around education and prevention and inspection and enforcement? Are there
They're contained within
performance
the prevention
measures?
and education section.
So they're not in your
there?
existing.
Is there any existing in place, or?
No.
So we'd need to be able to
No
develop.
formalized ones that exist. There are department kind of guidelines and templates that are used to target day-to-day workflow, but then this plan introduces new targets for fire prevention inspections and programs.
Okay, so I think that would be helpful in the event that, you know, we need to be, if we need to be taking a look at investing in additional resources, then what's the outcomes that we could expect relative to that investment? I think that would be helpful. Regional Councillor?
Thanks. I'm curious, and if the answer is, whatever the answer is, I'm just curious what it is, but is it common, would you commonly commonly see the inclusion of recommendations in master fire plan that got to the level of changing a part-time admin assistant to a full-time admin assistant? Is that, you drill down that finite? And so, then when it comes to number 8 and 9, would it be, what kind of staffing is left to, I guess, the normal budgetary process where, staffing has come through, but, I mean, it seems, future staffing of all types, or of all types of future staffing would come under a master fire plan?
Yes, sir.
We typically count it under resources, so when we look at a detailed divisional review and each function gets broken down, we look at what the staffing resources would be, what the fleet resources required are.
Okay, thank you.
So, Your Worship, just exactly to your question, that what we're recommending is the cycles within the plan be included with the establishing and regulating bylaws. So setting those performance measures for the prevention and education side are both recommended. Go ahead. And to facilitate that, we're suggesting that an additional full-time position of a fire and life safety educator be created, remembering that the plan is integrated. And so where we're looking to establish performance measures or enhance performance measures, we're looking to provide the support and the resources to achieve the types of performance that we're recommending. Similarly, on the fire inspector side, it was identified in 2008 the need for an additional fire inspector's position. We've looked at your capabilities. We've also identified an inspection cycle consistent with the changes in the fire service. So you now have a new commitment that you didn't have in 2008, which is on the care facilities, to conduct annual inspections, including a number of initiatives. And so what we've identified here, not only that you move this inspector's position forward, but to the councilor's previous question, this is an area that we would definitely be prioritizing. Go ahead. And so now on the inspection cycle side, similarly, we were suggesting you adopt those as performance targets. They would have to be included within the establishing and regulating bylaws of both municipalities, but also within the JCC agreement on the shared service agreement side. Number 18 deals with the way the current fire marshal's public fire safety guidelines are written. So PFSG 044512 talks about a fire prevention policy. It would typically be included as an appendix to the establishing and regulating bylaw. At present, you don't have a formal fire prevention policy. In my own view, I think you're doing everything that would be included within one, but that kind of direction should come from councils and the JCC. And so what we're trying to do is kind of cross some T's and dot the I's on the way that you operate. And this is an area that we think that needs to be addressed. I do want to pick up on a comment that the deputy mentioned in his first presentation. All of the public fire safety guidelines are currently under review. So all of the PFSGs that are mentioned within this report, Fire Marshal's office identified in January, they're going to review all of them. My expectation is they're going to reduce them significantly. So my recommendation to you is in some of these areas you're going to want to wait until those particular guidelines are updated before you start to proceed. I can say that number 19 is one I don't think is going to change very much. It's an area that the Fire Marshal has been focusing on significantly recently, particularly with the number of clients that we're currently working with that have been deemed non-compliant. This is one of the areas that they are looking at. So this one is simply we need to create an SOG that identifies what you actually do. Number 20 is a carryover. I think probably it just never got assigned to anyone to actually physically do, but it goes to with respect to the bylaws regulating the sale of fireworks. And where possible, we like to get that done and make sure it's consistently applied in both towns. So from the enforcement side, we have one rule on how we're going to apply it. Within the plan, we create a fire prevention public education staffing model that we're suggesting you adopt as the preferred model. Any questions? Okay.
Continue. Thank you.
We've somewhat discussed number 21, number 22. It's the fact that in your current deployment model, you're deploying 12 firefighters. We are suggesting that for low risk, it be 4, moderate risk, it be 14, and high risk, it be 24. I can tell you that the analysis we've used within the report comes from looking at both NFPA, the Fire Marshal's Public Fire Safety Guidelines, their critical task matrix, the occupational health and safety side from a firefighter safety and risk perspective, and also working with a lot of the clients that we've talked about today. What I'd suggest is the 4, 14, 24. If a municipality is not doing it today, they're more than likely exceeding it or working very strongly towards getting there. And that includes both volunteer, composite, and urban departments like yourselves. Number 23 is something that we have found to have a real dramatic impact on probability and consequences. So if you look at the risk analysis in the IRM web tool, you'll see that there's a great value put towards having our fire suppression staff do more pre-incident planning. So in other words, getting out and looking at occupancies and actually do some pre-incident planning of them and actually create a quick action plan. So in other words, saying to ourselves, if there was a fire in this building, what would we be doing? What are the things that, no matter what the fire was, we would automatically be doing? And so by creating those and developing those in advance, particularly the high-risk buildings, it can have a significant impact on the probability of a fire occurring and the consequences if it does. And the discussion of the day is the need for the 5th station. We've identified the location that we think it needs to be at. In our theory of keeping with 5 facilities, so not adding a 6th, for a number of reasons, we think that 5th station, you should consider using it for administration. You should also think strongly about using it for education and training. On the prevention and education side, in my view, I think it would be a strategic decision. It would certainly create synergies at the administrative level. However, when you look at your facilities, you might have some other options for prevention and education within one of your current facilities. The issue here is the current training center. Quite frankly, there's never been a decision on whether you're going to keep it or what you're going to do with it in the future. I want to make sure that you understand when we're talking about a training center, I'm talking about replicating what you have today, not building a new firefighters training school or a training tower with fire capabilities. You have a partnership, you have an opportunity that you use for that. I'm more interested in the synergies to bringing the staff together from an administrative perspective, a supervision perspective, a coordination perspective, and giving them the appropriate space to conduct the education and training activities.
Councillor Hempin?
Thank you. The area that's been identified is probably one of the more expensive real estate areas in the town of Newmarket. And some of our considerations around where we put facilities and how big those facilities are dependent on the costs. Was there ever any consideration to look at existing facilities where we could maybe have the administrative area in those locations as opposed to this new location? And in regards to the training facility, or even the existing space that we have, I know it's not a permanent space, but what were the concerns about keeping it there for the short term, if you can give me your opinion?
The training center in the short term, to best of my knowledge in looking at it, it is in need of some infrastructure improvements. There's no plan to put any investment in this building from a facility perspective. It's aging. I think it's reached its life expectancy. If that was to change and there was to be some permanency put to the fire department continuing to use it and there'd be some upgrades, I mean, it's more than meeting your needs. I suspect the property itself probably is bigger than what you actually need. To the concept of looking where your administration prevention is today, it's a very cramped facility. There's not a lot of space. Our focus here was to look at where are there synergies within the department. Right now, the 2 training officers are by themselves. Their supervisor is in another building. We'd certainly like to see that brought together. It would certainly be a lot nicer if we had the opportunity to have training centrally located to the entire service area. So those are some of the factors we looked at. Where the administration is today, could it be altered to encompass all of the prevention and education? That's an option. That should actually be pursued. I've had that conversation with the chief. When we talk about priorities, for me, the one here is bringing together administration and training and education.
Right.
And as far as land costs go, things like office space for administration, for prevention, for training, those can be built up. So the actual land area required could be similar to what would be required for any fire station, and then those uses could be 2nd floor, 3rd floor, and so on.
Right. Not the training facility though, right? So how much area would be required for a training facility?
Well, a lot depends on the nature of the site. What
Right.
does the site look like?
Well, no, we don't have a site.
I know. So ideally, on what I think we were envisioning, if you had a 2 to 3 acre site and it had the flexibility to use the whole site, I think it would work well. If you had some constraints, some setbacks, or whatever concerns were, you're going to enlarge on that piece of property. It's hard for us to paint that picture until you start getting into more detail. I can tell you effectively, I've seen it work really, really well on a 2 acre site, but the site was maximized. I mean, there was minimal it was in a commercial or industrial area, minimal setbacks. Conversely, I've seen it try to go in a multi-use area, a similar type use, and it was 4 acres, but there was setback issues. So the planning piece of it needs to be looked at, particularly when you're trying to go into an area that's already developed or partially developed.
So the concern about having not the training facility centrally located with the same fire hall in the administrative area, my question would be that when we have a training facility that is not on site where we have a fire station, is that truck decommissioned or what happens? Is it still in commission or?
What we do is many of the training activities that we conduct, we will bring up to 3 crews in one area. One of the crews is active, and the other 2 are on delayed response. So if something comes in, the ones on delayed response monitor the radio and then deploy if they have to, either to the incident or to provide coverage in another portion of the municipality.
Thank you.
Regional Councillor?
Thanks. Are you aware of examples where fire administration is in municipal offices or along with municipal offices?
Yes?
Is that an option?
Yes? Not the ideal option, in my opinion, but it is an option. Obviously, it's an option.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking before about municipalities of different sizes and standards, et cetera. How common is it to have a fire training center for municipalities of different sizes, et cetera? Are you able to provide any insights into that?
I would suggest in my past 6 years, either developing a training center or garnering access to one is in every one of the fire master plans I've worked with. Most municipalities have one or are working towards one. Those that don't have a very close relationship with a neighboring community. Now, the challenge becomes on the model of the fire department. If it's a full-time fire department, in my view, you would want to have access to your own training center within your area of response, so your service area, and be able to do on-duty training with your full-time staff. Because the only other option is for you to pay overtime and send them someplace. And that will do you out of business pretty quickly. When we get into composite and volunteer departments where there's more flexibility and they can share services with another community or 3 or 4 communities, and there's more flexibility on the staffing side, those tend to work well. For yourselves, I think you've got the opportunity for both. You're using a partnership really, really well for some specific training. You have a center that you provide opportunity to other departments to use on a cost recovery basis. The challenge is that there's no long-term plan for your current center. And it's, quite frankly, as I said, it's outlived its life expectancy. You have an opportunity, I believe, that you're, in some time in the near future, you're going to build a 5th fire station. I don't think it would take an awful lot of extra space to accommodate the needs of a training center within that fire station. Maybe we'd have to go from 1 acre and 1.5 acres to 2 acres, but we're not going from 1.5 acres to 10 acres. I can always refer to, if I look at the Mississauga Training Center, it's 30 some odd acres. It's like Firefighters Disneyland. In the city of Burlington, in my former employer, the headquarters station sits on 2 acres. There's a full administration, training, prevention headquarters, a maintenance facility, a training tower, and there's more than sufficient training grounds for a department the same size as you have. But as I said, that site is maximized. There's very little setback. And you know the planning business as well as I do. Setbacks can cause challenges, particularly when you get into planning things like parking and what your parking need is. And those are what can drive it. The use, I want to make sure that the training use is not going to drive that site. It's going to be the things like parking and other pieces. Suzanne's completely correct. More and more we're seeing fire stations build up versus building great big footprints.
I guess at the PSC, I think I asked you if there was an analysis of other options and particularly financial analysis of other options. And, you know, we can talk about overtime costs, and that's an issue. But if we haven't analyzed those financially, and is there an overtime cost if it's Bales Road versus, you know, very close to the service area as opposed to right in this? And so I guess I personally would be more comfortable with a recommendation that spoke to the need to ensuring that the ongoing provision of training functions and training needs, and then the process was allowed to sort of look at options and financial models for various situations, whether it's the current location, whether it's very close to the service area, whether it's co-located in this location, et cetera. I guess I'll say what's maybe been said this part, but it's a very it puts a lot of pressure on a municipal council when a master fire plan or something as weighty as a master fire plan says you should do this in this many years, and then we can all say, well, we've looked at it and we think maybe this might make more sense, but you've got people saying, well, you're questioning the experts. They said it should be right there in this many years alongside this use, and you know, I know they're very different processes and very different stakes at play, but the earlier master plan process that preceded this one gave, I forget the term, but gave directions, and then it was leaving sort of some process left to try to refine those down to something. And then again, I think particularly without the ability to look at various options like we would with almost any imperative in front of us in the municipality and weigh the pros and cons, weigh the costs, weigh the different operating and the capital models, et cetera. Having such a specific recommendation, I find it a little difficult, but appreciate it nonetheless.
How we find our way through to these recommendations and how we can accommodate those recommendations will have to be fleshed out a little more so, I think, as we go forward. Thank you.
So I think we've talked about number 25 sufficiently, that what our recommendation is. I will, Mr. Mayor, I agree with you 100%. These are our recommendations. And quite commonly, councils will direct their staff to come back with an implementation plan that looks at a number of different options that still meet the intent of what the recommendation is. Number 26 talks about that, the fact that with our fifth station, we're suggesting you look at a phased-in recruitment of 20 additional firefighters. What we're trying to do is keep the model you have with having a pump at each station and still have the aerials staffed. We're suggesting an estimated completion of that is 2016. I can tell you that the clock's been ticking. Certainly this process has taken longer than staff and ourselves thought it would. Some of the dates within the plan alone are aggressive, given the timelines that this process has taken. The next one deals with a challenge that we're seeing consistently across the GTA, and it's the fact that traffic congestion is starting to have a significant impact on travel times. Things like traffic calming and the network design and just congestion alone are impacting, and what we've identified as a recommendation that the fire service start to play a more active and proactive role in the road network development process. And I can tell you we're applying that consistently across the GTA.
Mr. Sheldon, go ahead. Finish. We're going through a transportation management plan now, and to what extent will fire services be engaged in that process? Or Mr. Nohammer?
Mr. Mayor, the issue of traffic calming and neighborhood traffic control measures is always an issue of concern and debate between the desire to slow traffic down and avoid speeding in neighborhoods, especially around schools, and the requirement for emergency services to provide effective response. So there will always be an open dialogue on that matter, on a specific matter when we perform an investigation on a specific street, or more generally when we're considering a traffic mitigation strategy.
So the plan then is to have fire services engaged in the development of that program? Good. Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Number 28, again, it's a carryover from the 2008 plan, and it deals with an operational issue, in my view, along the 4010 corridor. Number 29 is an accreditation process that has some potential benefit on the residential insurance side, that the department look at developing a tanker shuttle accreditation. A number of your neighboring communities have it. You would need to partner with them, in my view, to attain it, but it would certainly be beneficial. Number 30, I think, is an outstanding issue that's been around for a while, and that the JCC, in this case, requests an update from both towns on the development of a strategic framework for the fire hydrant compatibility issue. This is an operational issue that certainly in our view should be sorted out and figured out so that the fire department is applying and recognizing the hydrant system consistently across both municipalities. Any questions?
This certified tanker shuttle accreditation, is this like for taking water to a fire site?
Yeah. Used in the rural area, outside of a hydrant area.
Okay, and do we have many areas that are outside of a hydrant area at all?
And you have a few and along the highways.
Highways, yeah.
As Steve has identified, Mr. Mayor, anywhere that you're outside of municipal water, the town of Aurora has a very large area that we cover, and we have one tanker currently that works out of Station 44 at Wellington and Leslie, and we do have communications with the adjoining services that we provide primary service to, that their tankers will be dispatched right away. However, at this point, we don't have sufficient in-house capacity to achieve the accreditation.
Okay, thank you. That's been informative.
So in a similar strategy, as we talked previously about the administrative support, where we've identified the administrative assistant in this position would assist the training officers in doing their work. It allows us to get the training officers doing the training versus administrative functions that could be done by someone with less technical experience. And that number 32 is again a carryover from the 2008, one that, to the councillor's point about prioritization, this is one I would put up towards the top of the list, that you hire a third training officer. You've been using some secondments that works fairly well, but certainly not as well as what we think this would do. This one also goes to the fact that, as I said at the beginning, if we do really, really well and can reduce the number of fires, it only puts more pressure on the development and delivery of our comprehensive training program, in addition to the fact that the need and your liabilities and requirements under occupational health and safety are only increasing on a daily basis with regard to training. Number 33 is somewhat linked to that, in the fact that on the management side, we've identified a need in short term for you to consider an assistant deputy chief's position. We think that aligns with your emergency planning and preparedness initiatives, as well as to provide oversight on the training side to make sure that you are consistently sustaining the level of training that you required. Number 34 speaks to that, what the roles and responsibilities we think the assistant deputy would be. It is a carryover from the 2008 plan. Keep going, Suzanne. Number 35 is goes along with what was identified previous in the report, is that we create some more guidelines on the roles and responsibilities of particular positions within the department, this being the training officer's position. We'd like it to a little bit more definition into what their roles and responsibilities are, and clearly identified so that everyone knows what their job is. It aligns with number 36, which is a carryover from the 2008 plan. I think number 37 gives you the flexibility that we were talking about a few minutes ago. We've identified a need to do an analysis of the training facility itself through an assessment, and as part of the design and development of the proposed fifth station be considered. So I don't think we've tied your hands to say that the fifth station has to have the training facility. I think, as council's identified, we're suggesting a decision needs to be made on the future of training facility within the Central New York Fire Services. One of the things that is happening, number 38, within the industry is that last year the fire marshals and the fire chiefs and the associations came to an agreement that NFPA would be adopted for the professional qualification standards. So previously we had our own firefighter standards in Ontario. We're now moving towards NFPA. That is a fairly significant transition process as we move forward, and all we're doing is identifying here that that's going to have to be included in your future comprehensive annual training program, is how you're going to make that transition and sustain the levels of training that are identified within FPA. Excuse me. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Big.
Thank you very much for your presentation. This has been very useful to get this type of detailed overview of the fire plan. So I really do appreciate that. Our plan going forward. A couple of questions. On page 166 of very many pages we got from you, there's an implementation plan with dollars attached to it. Do those dollars cover all 38 recommendations? Like, how comprehensive is that?
It covers all of the ones that we could identify had a cost and economic to it.
No, okay, so I immediately look at, without really asking you for a comment, it's more of a thinking out loud. I do know we split the cost with Aurora 60/40, so I appreciate that. But in 2016, it's approximately $1.25 million operational spending, and then going to 2017, it's approximately $1.5 million operational spending. So these are very significant increases, and even with our split, we as council, and again, I'm just speaking aloud now, we try to limit our tax increases to about 2, perhaps 2.5%, but somewhere in that range. These recommendations would basically consume all of our targeted tax increases without removing snow for residents, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't expect you to comment on that. But that's just one of the things that struck me immediately, that this is a very, very expensive, moving forward, this will be very expensive if we adopted all the recommendations, and it would cause us great challenges, much like other municipalities face these challenges, and there has been a lot of talk that the cost of fire services is almost becoming unaffordable, because it's already taking up a significant amount of our budget. And right now, pretty well going forward with these would consume all of our targeted tax increases. So it's just a comment that I'm making.
Thank you. Regional Councillor.
Thanks. Just curious to Councillor Hempin's point earlier about information and comparative information that could be helpful. Do we have any information on comparing one fire service to another on admin levels? We often have some data like that we can, in various forms, but we can receive from municipalities. Is there any data like that?
Councillor, to kind of carry on that conversation, one of the most significant challenges we have is on comparability. There is no one data source collection that we have access to the information. We've not been able to garner it through our process. I'm sure your staff may be able to put something like that together. Unless you're our client, we don't get access to that.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
No further questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's a lot of detail to sift our way through. Thank God we have a JCC committee that's going to get their roll up their sleeves and get at it for us. Very substantial challenges ahead of us, and I think the real important item will be how we can phase this and get the best possible value for our taxpayers, but at the same time sustain the level of protection that our community has come to expect in the growing environment. So it's going to be a significant challenge, but the information you provide is very helpful, and it will be taken as recommendations for consideration, and how we go about reaching what the recommendations are, I think, will be the job of the JCC and the job of this council. So thank you very much, Chief. As well. Any further items? There being none, then I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.